We're live. Hello, I'm Eagle. Eagle Gardens 1 on Instagram. And this is fucking talking shit with Eagle, episode 844. A special revisit tonight with good old breeder Steve. How you doing, my friend?
Good, Eagle. Thanks for having me back, man. Nice to see you again.
Oh, I'm grateful to have you. It's been 2 years since we last talked. I'm sure you're always a busy, super busy man. I'm sure you've got a lot has happened since the last time we've talked.
Probably a few things, yeah, that's for sure.
I guess we could start out with what's current. Uh what do you have outdoor this year? What do you have? What'd you put out at your place?
Oh, for the pool bud, for my
Yeah.
backyard
Yeah.
duties, I made no plans for stuff and I just waited to see what the universe would bring me. And I've done that the last number of years, and it's just been kind of interesting that I'll just grow whatever I get gifted in the spring. And one guy brought me back an amnesia haze plant that I gave him cuts of a couple of years ago. So he brought me back a nice one. So that one's further ahead than my other ones. And then I have somebody else gave me uh, gelato 45 crossed with triangle kush and a gorilla glue 4 and vanilla 1 sunrise. No idea what that is. Some peanut butter breath that I'd had a cut a few years ago that I really liked from a friend that got it out of the first round of seeds ever released of it, I think. And that cut of peanut butter breath was very nice. Tiny buds, but really a distinct taste and kind of nice to have. And a pre-98 Bubba that same person gave me back a few years ago. And I'm a real hash man, so the pre-98 Bubba makes a beautiful jet black. If you like the old school peppery black hash, the pre-98 Bubba it's great as bud, but I really love it as what it does for hash. Like it makes a beautiful, a black hash you can see your reflection in, Some of the other ones with the same treatment, they'll always just be like a tan little ball or chestnut brown maybe, but that one just goes inky black real quick with the least bit of handling. So I get a kick out of that. It's a classic Dutch. And there was one other one he gave me, and I'll be damned, I can't remember the cross. It was something I hadn't heard of. I think there was Forgotten Soldier crossed with something or other. I got no idea. I'll have to look it up and tell you what that one is. It's on the tag, but it's raining outside and I don't feel like going to check the tag. So you'll have to forgive me.
Oh no. I actually kind of honored. I actually we're growing one of the same things this year, and I've got the pre 98 Bubba Kush as well going
Okay. Yeah, no,
outdoors.
that's a real classic for sure.
That's awesome. This will be my second year at trying to do something outdoors. I've been an indoor cultivator for a long time, but for a multitude of reasons, I haven't been able to grow outdoors. But this year, I'm making a serious effort at.
Yeah, I love outdoors. I mean, it's great wherever you can do it. If the only place you can do it's your closet, that's great. If the only place you can do it's your balcony, that's great. Just do it, you know? And if once you get some good outdoors, like outdoors is a gamble, and that's why, seasonally is different, particularly at the higher latitudes. If you're on the equator, you usually have a pretty predictable rainy season, dry season kind of scenario. Whereas up north, or down south, depending where you are, you can have a variable harvest, let's say, that's why wine has a year on it because every vintage can be different. You might have a nice September, you might have a poor September, so every year is not kind to you outdoors at higher latitudes, but when all the stars align, outdoors has always been my favorite. Like I've grown super indoor, I've smoked super indoor, 9.9 out of 10, but the only 10s I've ever had have been outdoor, which isn't to say all outdoors are 10s, but the best I've ever had has always been outdoor. I would say my top three herbs I ever smoked were outdoor grown, and it's not that you can't do really, really good indoor. You can. And consistency indoors all day. You win on consistency. And that's the holy grail of manufacturing for anybody. So I can see the appeal indoors. But the main thing indoors because we had to hide it, and it was illegal to import it from sunny places. So if you're going to grow your own and you live somewhere where hit or miss outdoors, you got to learn to grow indoors to be consistent and have a nice product. It only makes sense, right? But if I once you get, you match the genetics to the locale, then you can really make the magic. If you're planting the wrong stuff in the wrong place, you're never going to make the magic, But if you really get the right plant in the right place and get the right season, you've got such a beautiful plant. And if you're like me and you like making hash from it, doesn't even matter if the buds picture perfect because you're just going to make hash out of it. So as long as the resin tastes like the resin, you're good. You want it to finish, as much as it can, but I can be more forgiving. Like I know I'm too far north at 50 degrees to finish a lot of my favorite genetics outdoors in the way I'd like to see them finished, but I got to grow them in much warmer, sunnier places to make that happen. But I do what I call cheater outdoor and keep the rain off it. So I've got a south-facing backyard. So I got a south-facing porch on the house. So I can, once the rain is in the forecast in the fall, I pull all the pots under the porch. So they're facing south and they get that sun's low in the sky by then, and the sun just shines in there, but the rain can't reach it, you know? So it keeps the buds dry. So I call it cheater outdoor. As long as you can keep the rain off it, you can stretch out another month, The light's getting weaker all the time and it's not ideal for like, award-winning flower, but for having all you can smoke hash is beautiful, you know. So it keeps me from, you know, I get enough from my backyard that I don't feel compelled to grow inside as well. And then if I travel more in the winter, I'm not asking anybody to take care of the plants for me, which is a hassle, and you come back and you're like, oh, So I'm just happy at home to strictly be homegrown in the backyard. And then for professional endeavors, I'm happy to do them where I can have a field, but without all the crazy overhead, like in Canada and North America in general, if you want to grow fields of THC plants, there's a whole lot of compliance costs, right? It's very expensive to get all the licensing and regulations and permits and all that. Whereas in somewhere like Thailand right now, it's pretty open. So, the thing I thought Colombia had really good promise when we saw the first edition of the regs, but when a new government came in and changed them all, they really moved the goalposts on us and added quotas. And then even if you were breeding, they wouldn't let you plant more than 200 seeds of each type. So you don't go to all this trouble to fence 60 acres to make selections and then told you can only plant 200 seeds of each kind. Like, forget it. So in Thailand, there's no quotas like that. So you can just, if I want to start 100,000 seeds of each type and kill 90% of them every 10 days, I can do that. And I don't have to apply to do that. So Colombia became a regulatory burden, that was counterproductive to working there. So I was really happy to shift focus to Thailand. And then I'm about to have something starting in West Africa, but the license has been dragging out and out and out. So I'm starting to lose a little hope on it. But we have, through the government Seed Institute, we've been able to start doing some selections and classifications of the West African seed collection from things across the area. And that's been very interesting to see, but I haven't gone over yet. I've only seen the pictures and videos from the plants, but I can see there's a lot of stuff that we collected that was closer to civilization, and that stuff's pretty bastardized with European stuff because there's a lot of traffic between UK and down there and Holland, and so lots of people in the diaspora have sent seeds home or visitors have brought them. But if you want to find the really authentic, native types, you got to keep going further up the river and past the roads and everything. And you get in far enough, then you start finding plants that are true to type, to what you would expect to find there, that haven't been crossed with UK cheese and blueberry power plant and all this other, imported stuff, which is, it's a mixed blessing because those people see, they're on the same internet we are and they see all the same modern genetics and they're like, man, I want to try that out. And you can't blame them, but on the other hand, they don't totally appreciate what they have already. So they're quick to cross it. And of course, we all want to cross stuff and see how it turns out. And that's just part and parcel of it. And it's how it ended up there in the first place, is people been traveling with seeds, right? So the interesting thing I think with West Africa is according to um, some reports I've read that they were the first to smoke cannabis, that it
Uh,
traveled, west from Southeast Asia, and then it made it to the Middle East, made it into East Africa, made it across to West Africa. But the oldest pipes, in chalice, like they have the bongs, they were smoking them in clay pipes and clay bongs, and that was the first recorded instances apparently of them smoking cannabis was in West Africa, and that before that it was always eaten in food or consumed as a beverage or rubbed on with a salve or something, but nobody started smoking it until West Africa, apparently, one hypothesis of it. But I thought that was interesting. But I find a lot of similarities. Like one of my favorite narrow leaf of all time was really proper Santa Marta Gold. And then when you start looking at the West African types, you'll see the similarities. And there's, high probability that that seed got taken to South America with slave ships. And I'm not saying that necessarily that the slaves got to bring it, but those ships ran on hemp sails and hemp rigging. And I bet you when they found that they're European hemp, which they would always travel with hemp seed in case they needed new sails or rigging, that once they got to the tropics and they tried growing, you know, French hemp or Spanish hemp or UK hemp in the tropics, they go, this hemp doesn't work here that well, it rots and they have all the problems with it. And they probably noticed some in West Africa and said, well, hey, this is pretty tropical here. They got palm trees and hemp. Let's take some of their hemp with us and try using that. So there's, that's one theory about how cannabis made that cross the Atlantic. So whether that's, how it got there, who knows? Some people say it was always there. Nobody really knows, or at least as far as I can tell. But I think there's a case for it. And I've heard stories, I don't know this for sure either, but that when they've sequenced Santa Marta Gold and they've sequenced West African types and they see the relation there. So I mean, Santa Marta Gold, they've settled Santa Marta. It was the second oldest city in the Americas, right? Or the oldest city in the Americas. It might be the oldest city in the Americas incorporated. It's the second church. The first church was in Santo Domingo, and the second church was in Santa Marta. But Santa Marta may have been the first city incorporated in the Americas. So the Europeans got there 500 years ago. So it's, that's an old town. And the people that were growing Santa Marta gold there, I talked to some of the old people and visited the old farms and saw the tractors they were using in the 60s and 70s and everything. And they still had the big diesel pumps that they irrigated the fields with and stuff. And they said, yeah, that Santa Marta gold, which they had lost by then, it really wasn't common around there anymore because everything got brought in, right? So everybody's constantly trying new stuff. And even back then, they were trying new stuff, but they said, anything we brought here just didn't work because we have this cool nighttime cool air come down from the Sierras. And it was like a moist fog that came down every night. And except for that one, everything was getting mold problems. So that was the most mold resistant plant. And that was why it was so, commonly sown back then. So it's so fun to trace, I wish I knew more about the molecular genetics. I'm always happy to work with people or talk with people that know how to deal with it because it's such a ledger of life embedded in the chromosomes, It's all Greek to me. Like as far as I can't run the tests and need it, I need an interpreter. What does this say, But it is fascinating to see what's there. So you can there's just endless amounts to study, genetics is a rabbit hole like anything. You get right into it, you can always find out more, and then you ask more, and then you find out more. You can keep going.
I can't imagine how deep your rabbit hole is with all the genetics you've seen in the living library and all that. I mean, you've got quite the vault of knowledge, I'm sure, of genetics, and it's amazing. I love to hear the stories that you always bring to the table about some of the genetics.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy it, man. I can
So,
ramble on about it. It's about the only thing I can ramble on about. Knowledge, semi-knowledgeably.
so have you seen anything special? Let's back up a little bit because when the last time we spoke, you were still in Colombia and you were just thinking about Thailand. You know what I mean? You weren't
No,
quite there yet. I think you had made some contact, but you hadn't made the jump over there yet. So how did
well,
all
we
that go?
started we started the Thai project about 5 years ago. It was an old friend of mine from Switzerland and his Thai wife, and she lived with him in Switzerland for 12 years and studied Italian baking and that, and she makes perfect ciabatta or focaccia, pizza or fresh pasta. Like so it's really fun visiting them because, he really loves Italian food and imports Italian cheeses and Italian deli meats and stuff. And you go visit them, and I feel like I'm back in the Italian part of Switzerland eating the same foods, because he lived in Thailand a long time now. Like he's probably been there 8 years or something. So he gets those, cravings for comfort food from home. So they really, when I go to visit them in the absolute middle of Thailand, where you're totally far from the tourist areas, and we're eating like the best Italian food. It's just really disconcerting almost to be there. But like, I'm happy to eat Thai food, of course, too. But he's kind of like, I just can't eat Thai food anymore. I just want to eat food from home. But so anyway, we got the hemp license early on, long before they had descheduled. So it was about 2 years ago, or maybe three now. I forget that they descheduled. Um, and we had got the hemp license and then built out under that so that we were ready to go because we sort of saw it coming on the horizon that they were going to open up more than just hemp. But when we built the facility, it was only allowed hemp at that time. And so I said, whatever, let's build the facility, grow some CBD plants, test the system, train the people. And then by then, hopefully, we'll be able to grow everything. And that we timed it just right because that is exactly what happened. So they were ready to hit the ground running the day it was legal because the facility was up and tested at that point. So that was good timing. Um, yeah, so it's ongoing. There hasn't been as much focus on breeding as I'd like, but the breeding is half mine and half theirs, but the flower is all theirs and the clone business is all theirs. So that's been more their focus. It's their place, it's their money. I don't begrudge them that, but any amount of breeding we do is half and half. So it's two separate companies basically. But that's ongoing and they're, taking to it. They're starting to get more and more into the breeding program. And so it's a bit of an enthusiasm thing. You kind of have to inspire a little. But the first round of beans came out, and actually, this Seeds of Anarchy shirt. This is what one of the brands are being sold under, Seeds of Anarchy. And yeah, I mean, they're interesting because the parent I used to make the first crosses was a reversed candy slurricane. And a lot of people are like, why candy slurricane? And even the candy slurricane, it's a quarter slurricane. It's not even half slurricane. So um, but when I got to Thailand on that trip, I landed there during their New Year's, which is Songkran. And I got to Bangkok and just walking down the streets, there's people selling joints at tables. They have jars of joints or bud still, but they're like, oh, candy slurking, candy slurking. And it was like the weed of the town at that time. There were lots of other flavors, but consistently they all had candy sugarcane. So I think there were some big warehouses growing it, and people could get kilos of that. It was like the most common indoor at the time, let's say. So there was candy sugarcane was everywhere, and I thought it's kind of a snapshot of that time in Thailand to hit everything with candy sugarcane. So it was more you know, um, like a keepsake of a time, you know? I don't know how to put it right, but it's a snapshot of the taste of Thailand at that time. And then the different mothers we used, they came from an assortment of places, but they were all punchy smoke or they wouldn't make it, you know? So into the list. And we probably checked out, I think, 130 different things the first year. The next year we checked out another 100 and something. And so we really had gone through a lot. So if you narrowed, if you've gone through 250 and you've got five you really like, those are probably pretty good, you know? If you take the best five out of the 250 modern hybrids, that's not even counting like the Laotians and the Cambodians and the Vietnamese and stuff, but just of modern hybrids. So there was probably 250 of those, the various ones. And there was a Don Mega Larry Chimes. I'll be fucked if I can't remember them all. But they were different for different reasons. There was a Mean Mug, Cherry Pie Lime, I think it was Mean Mug CPL. That one might have been from Dutch Blooms. That was nice. So there was some really anything that was really nice smoke. I said, let's fucking hit it. And then we'll test them out. We'll send them to testers. And then what people like, that's what we'll release, you know? So we made a bunch of test crosses, sent them out to testers and when everybody came back and said, my favorite three were the gargoyle, the sour cherry, and the ego punch. And basically, those were the top three. And really sexy pictures came back from the testers that were super happy with them, and they were crossing them with things as fast as they could. And you know, I think you'll see those. I think they've been out now for like a year and a half or so, and I think they haven't come out with like a loud bang, but I think you're going to see them around for a while because the people that have found cuts of them have found really nice ones. So that they've been keeping mothers and sharing cuttings. I think they'll just sort of grow organically their popularity. It's not like I was advertising and wasn't entering them in any cups or anything. Just put them out there and let people try them. And if they like them, they'll be stick around. And if they don't like them, they won't, you know? So you just gotta try sometimes, right?
How do you feel? I mean, I guess about testers like passing out cuttings of the tester packs before like
Oh, I
release
love
and
it.
stuff like
I
that.
love it. Get it around. I love to see them spread it around, you know? It's a
Okay.
beautiful thing because it's great value, you know. I remember one guy always sticks in my mind. He was in Texas, and this was during Prohibition times long ago. And he said, "Man, there wasn't that many seed companies then either. So if you said, well, I bought all the seeds from all the seed companies, maybe there was 10 seed companies, you know, so it wasn't that big a deal. Nowadays, you couldn't buy all the seeds from all the seed companies. You'd never even finish your list, right? But he said, man, I've grown out everything. I have like 8 lights or 12 lights or whatever. It's really hush hush. I live in Texas, but we get good prices for a herb. He said the $60 I paid for your shishka berry seeds. I got 12 seeds, found one absolutely phenomenal mother. She literally doubled my revenue just overnight. Just switching that cutting out doubled my revenue, you know. So he says, I literally bought my wife a Cadillac, and got her custom plates that says Shishka. You know? So I just love that story, you know, because he's like, I was doing good, you know, but man, then I was doing really good because it just doubled. So that one pack of seeds, he can take cuttings off of that for the next 30 years. You know, that's cool. What do I care? You know, he bought a pack one time, he's his to do what he wants with, right? So that's a beautiful thing. Um, yeah, to me, it's just appreciation. If it lasts I like to see that because it shows that people liked it, you know. So like my oldest living cutting that I bred was a sweet skunk. And the fact that, you know, it's not a classic commercial strain in that it takes longer, makes fluffier buds. It's not the hard nugs people want to see. It takes 12 weeks, not 8, you know. It's not what everybody's looking for in an indoor commercial bud, but once they smoke it, they keep it, you know, generally speaking, you know, they'll be like, damn, that's fucking head stash. I see one guy from Instagram, even recently, he's still posting pictures. He started growing out the real sweet skunk cut that he got from a friend in Canada. And he's like, dude, you know, dispensary owners buy their personal from me. I'm a small grower. I don't have a license. I don't supply dispensaries, but dispensary owners buy an ounce of head stash off me because I grow Kai Bud. And he said, this sweet skunk's my head stash. Like, I don't even want to sell it to them. You know, he's like, he just loves it. And then when people show, you know, that they cherish it like that, that makes me happy. But I really, when I spread that cutout, anybody that asked me for it, I gave it to it. I said, I'll give it to you on one condition. They're like, what, don't share it? And I said, no, you got to share it with at least 6 people. If anybody asks you for a cut, promise me you'll give them one, you know, because I want everybody to have a jar of this. I'm not saying it should be the only jar they have, but I want everybody to have a jar of this because when I go to visit them, I want to see it. You know, I want to see that everywhere because it's just so special and it smells so heady. And I know friends who, you know, they're absolute ganja geeks and their wives aren't necessarily, but that's still, there's like there's one type of weed my wife will smoke and it's the sweet skunk. You know, they won't smoke it. She's like, she won't smoke anything else. So again, always crack up that it's always been a lady's choice too. Like the ladies absolutely love it. So it's you know, that's not to say that they all like perfumey herb. Maybe some of them like the stuff that smells like dead animals and roadkill. That's cool. But it's not what I gravitate to in cannabis. I can appreciate some rank ass, stinky, rotten herb, but it's not my go-to, you know? It amuses me that it's some people's favorites because to me it's such base aromas, but they're harder hitting plants too, and they more of a headbanger high, let's say, you know, rather than a cerebral one, you know. So different strokes for different folks. You know, if we all like the same weed, how boring would that be, right? But I know that if there's something that jumps out at me and I really like it, then I'm sure other people will too. Not everybody, but I'm sure a lot. If I like it, a lot of people are going to like it because I'm just pickier than most people. And I might say, yeah, a lot of the stuff people like, I really don't like. I had a guy come over recently and he had jars of all the most expensive live rosins from the local dispensaries. And he goes, here, smell this, smell this. And they all smell like this mulch leaf that I can't stand it really. You know, it's like it's something very common in Afghanicas. And I think of it in if you were describing a wine, you'd say it was sous bois. You know, it's the forest floor. You know, it's mushroomy, earthy kind of and it reminds me of like mulching leaves, like elm leaves or oak leaves or something, or boxwoods. If you ever walk by a boxwood hedge, they have that smell exactly. And it revolts me. And that's really common in Afghanicas. One of the reasons I love Santa Marta Gold Mine is there's no Afghan in it, you know? So I realize like a Baba Kush or whatever, you know, it's all Afghan heritage in these things, basically. And it's really special for what it is. It's a great example of it and it doesn't have that as much. I found the northern Afghans didn't have as much of that as the southern Afghans, but it's not one of my favorite aromas. And some people just love it. You know, it's really personal preference. So there's no right or wrong. It's just I try to look for things that have brighter, fruitier flavors or more floral, perfumey flavors rather than the real rank ones. But I mean, like my blockhead, there's a lot of vinyl kind of note to that. I had like that synthetic vinyl smell, like a fresh blow up doll. You know, you can appreciate it, but it's not my day to day smoke. I definitely like the sweeter, fruitier ones for just like the day to day easy going smoke. And plus, those ones tend not to put the hurt on people. They're usually kind of a social buzz and they get you happy and chatty. Whereas You can have some that are very stupefying and they just bring the party down. They don't get people up dancing. They just get them like, it's just like you got kicked in the head. But that's all right. Whatever you're looking for is fine with me. And there's room for all the kinds.
That's awesome. So, did you find any gems? Did you find anything in your time in Thailand that was worth bringing home or worth working
I
with?
didn't bring
Or
anything home, but some of the favorite ones so far that got seeded, they're released in the States under the Seeds of Anarchy, and they're released in Thailand under Genetic Can Seeds, and they'll shortly be in Europe as well. Testers in Europe have done well with them, but they're not available in Europe yet, but we're getting a phytosanitary search done on the seeds in Thailand right now, so we can send them to our distribution point in Holland. So I can import seeds legally to Holland with the company there we have, but we can't sell in Holland. We can sell elsewhere in the EU. So a place like Germany, they can't import from outside the EU, but they can import from anywhere within the EU. So you import the seeds to Holland, but then sell them in Germany. So that's how that's going to flow. And what are some of the other nice ones I found there? I found a beautiful, um, I forget it was Hawaiian something. I want to say white Hawaiian or Hawaiian haze or bloody hell. I can't think of it off the top of my head right now. And the other one was a golden goat selection. And I really like that golden goat. It's got, the sweet skunk knockoff called Island Sweet Skunk is a quarter of the mix, and it has a Romulan, and it's the real, or what I think of as the real BC Romulan, or the cut that got well known from BC. And it has a very distinctive piney nose. It reminds me of like a pine urinal puck. And so that golden goat, I can totally smell the sweet skunk and I can totally smell the Romulan in it. So I really like the golden goat. Small nugs, but really a distinct nose and really nice taste. I was very happy with the golden goat we found there. But yeah, I'll go back probably in later in the winter coming up. And I know we've been really focused on going through a lot more Southeast Asian stuff because that's more my interest in the tropics rather than growing the modern hybrids and polyhybrids, but to work through a lot of the local stuff or regional stuff and then just try and improve it. So you don't have to reinvent it, but you can tighten it up, and maybe knock down the hermaphrodism in it and that sort of thing, because that's pretty common. A lot of Southeast Asians have hermaphrodism built in, and it's something, and I think it's the default of cannabis that originally cannabis, in theory, was monoecious, and humans teased it apart into the male and female dioecious that we think about now. And of course, now with 20 years of feminizing everything, it's going back to the monoecious, and herms are a big issue again. So it's that's a perfect segue into this Verosense program that I've launched, which is with the infertile females. So you can take any cutting of anything and make it into an infertile version of itself. And it has no hairs, right? There's no stigmas, or what we like to call pistils, but they're stigmas, not pistils, really. But there's no hairs on these things. And I really don't think anybody's going to miss them. If you're like me, at some point in your life, you've gone to the bottom of the bag and found a big pile of red hairs and said, I'm going to roll a hair joint and just smoke up all these, you know, orange hairs and roll it up and smoke it. There's nothing there, you know? It's like there's there's no point. They don't contribute anything to the quality of the smoke. There's no resin growing on the hairs. There's cystolithic hairs growing on the hairs, but there's no actual resin glands growing on them. And most people that grow aren't breeding, you know. Home breeders and professional breeders always gonna have male and female plants if they're doing their work. You gotta have males and females to do a good breeding program. But if you're just growing weed to smoke, the one thing you don't want is seeds in your weed, and not even micro seeds, where you get a banana the last week and then there's just a few little white seeds, and you see when you're breaking up the weed, there's those little tiny white dots that are like just thinking about growing into seeds. But even that, in for professional growers, they have to be careful for EU GMP quality weed. That's grounds for a recall. So accidental pollinations are a problem. In the EU pharmacopoeia, they list seeds and microseeds as foreign matter. So it's considered a contaminant in the bud. So if
Wow.
you're selling EU GMP flower from your multi-million-dollar greenhouse, you can't have some patients in Germany breaking up their bud under a microscope and going, I see little seeds. You know, they will complain. And I know Canadian producers that have had weed returned from Germany because they had little seeds in it, micro seeds. And they're like, oh, the Canadians never noticed. They just get the weed, throw it in the grinder, they smoke it. But the Germans are like picking it apart under a microscope and going, I see little seeds. There are little seeds starting. It's so funny, but if you're a commercial producer, you can't risk accidental pollinations. So you literally are going to add it to your SOPs that you can only grow infertile females. And that every master grower at the commercial producers, they're going to be locked into just growing seedless plants. There's no way they're going to be allowed to risk accidental pollinations given the option. And the average home grower has zero interest in breeding. They just want to grow buds with no seeds in it. So these cuttings are going to be perfect for them too. And the consumers, when they go into dispensary, they can look for guaranteed seedless plants because it'll have the Circle V trademark for Verosense, which is certified seedless seeds. You can go to certifiedseedless.com and that'll take you to Verosense and it gives you a little explanation about it. Um, a lot of people, the first misconception that's most common is people go, oh, triploids. I say, no, it's not triploids. And triploids and other polyploids, they beget stenocarpic plants. And that means they can receive pollen, but they can't ripen the seed. So they abort those little white seeds. So when you get a seedless watermelon, you get the little white pips. The seedless grapes, they've got like a little, astringent little white pip in the center of those seedless grapes. And they receive pollen, they just abort these little white seeds. So those micro seeds are still unacceptable in smoke, right? So typical Sensimilla is facultative parthenocarpy. And I tell people you can remember that because facultative is like facilitate. So parthenocarpy is a virgin fruit. So you facilitate the virgin fruit because you keep away the males, right? So that's traditional Sensimilla. Obligate parthenocarpy is when the plant is obliged to remain virgin fruit because it's physically incapable of receiving the pollen. It doesn't have anywhere to receive the pollen, so it can't make it. You could grow an absolute sensimilla plant in the middle of a hemp field. It will not take seeds. And so other people, one of the common things I've heard people say, oh, it's like those Terminator seeds. And it's not like the Terminator seeds because when I make it from seed, 50% of the plants from this generation will have no hairs, and those are infertile. The other 50% have hairs and are fertile. Whereas if they were Terminator seeds, none of them would be fertile, right? So this is it's not quite what people are expecting. A lot of people think, oh, it's mutagenic. It's not mutagenic, really. They don't know what I'm doing exactly, so there's a lot of speculation about it. But I think at the end of the day, in a few years, hopefully, no more than 5 years, consumers will really look for and learn to trust the Circle V logo as guaranteed seedless because you can roll up a nice bat and it just takes one little seed in there absolutely destroys the joint. There's, one seed wrecks a joint. It doesn't matter how big the seed is, it doesn't matter how big the joint is. One seed and it's fucking shit, right? So I think
If it's made it to the point where it's being smoked, yes. But I don't know how many times I've cracked open a bud and found a rando seed that shouldn't been there. That I've been like, I gotta pop that. You know,
well,
that's a
and
gift.
you can
That
find
is
a
a
great
gift.
seed that way. Like, it's not to say that the genetics all bad in that. There's just a high probability it's gonna have a herm issue because that's likely why it got there in the first place. So, people say, "Oh, Chem D is amazing, amazing ganja. It was a bag seed." Yeah, but it's a bag seed with a fucking herm problem. So that's one of the plants we're fixing. We're gonna repair the Chem D so it doesn't herm and it can't make a seed. So that one is being worked on. So
Okay. Well,
everything's
is there
worth
any
doing is getting
credibility
done.
to the
Pardon me?
fact that maybe it didn't herm out, but it went full term? You know what I mean? And it like at some genetics, if you let it ripen out, I mean really ripen, they will throw a banana as a survival technique. Now, is that pollen? Would you consider that more herm pollen or a better version of, I guess, herm
The
pollen?
herm. It's still a herm. It's just a
Same,
late
same,
herm.
same,
It's
same.
just a late herm. Yeah. That's how I look at
Uh-huh.
it.
All right.
Not all of them will do that. A lot will. And since they've been 20 years of feminizing's been super common, it's very, very common now. I'd say that between the 80s and now, people's tolerance for a couple seeds in a bag is higher now than it used to be. Like we used to slag people if there was a fucking seed in an ounce, you know? And now if you get a seed in an eighth, you're like, that's normal. You know, people are just used to seeing it because so many things throw that banana in the last week. And the stuff that's a week or two behind it, that's picking up a few little grains of pollen here or there. But, if you find the seed and you don't smoke it, it's less of an issue. But if you smoke it, it just
Oh
ruins your
yeah,
joint.
it's
It really
yeah,
ruins your joint, you
it did.
know?
Yeah, I give you
So I
that.
think they're not going to miss the hairs on the buds. It's going to be like 70s bush, you know? It'll just be the weirdos that want it, you know?
So I got all right. First of all, I want to give you props because the last time I spoke with you and we talked about the infertile plants there, the sterile plants that you looked at me and you said hybrids, no problem. Unlock those, no problems. It's the land races that are giving me the headache right now or trouble unlocking it. So is Africa and
No, I found them.
Thailand kind of opened up that for you a little bit, being
Yeah, but
able to
also
play with?
I have figured out a way to get the tropicals to do it better. So it was
Uh,
you're right though, it was easier with the modern hybrids to start with. And then the plants that seemed resistant to the process were the narrow leaves, but I came up with a solution for that. So now the narrow leaves, we've got them behaving, they're coming into line. So you can cure any cutting of hermaphrodism this way. So
hmm.
that's a beautiful thing. The
Are,
I've got a good lineup of breeders signed up. I closed the signups for breeders on June 15th, so just past last Sunday. And now we're putting together the catalog, and that catalog should be launched in about 8 months. So that should be interesting. And that will just be available B2B for quite a while. And that just licensing them to producers. And then after that, we'll start licensing them to nurseries so that everybody can get them directly from nurseries. So home growers can go and get their four and know that they're growing something that'll never ever pick up a seed. So the other fun thing with those plants is they root in 3 or 4 days, whereas their fertile sisters take 10 or 12 days to root. So it's interesting that way. So I
it,
call this one of my black and white projects. I say it's black and white. Your bud is either seedless or it's not, you know? So, but my other black and white project, which is just about to launch, it hasn't launched, is solves the issue of lab shopping. So first I tried to license out the idea for royalties to some bigger companies because at the time I thought of it a few years ago, I didn't have the bandwidth to launch it myself. But as more things I was working on were stabilized and I had more time, in January this year, I decided to launch it myself. So actually putting my wife in charge of it. So the real boss is on it, and she's twice as smart as me and at least as good looking. The but the lab shopping and THC inflation is what a lot of people use to sell their weed. They go, the customers come in, they're not always the most informed consumers, and they just tell the bud tenders, look, I want the highest THC. So that's how they shop. And pot's expensive because it's so heavily taxed. And I can kind of understand people are looking for bang for the buck. Like if they were going into a liquor store and there was just all this vodka and they said, well, this one's 30% alcohol, this one's 40% alcohol, that one's 50% alcohol. It's just vodka. They're all the same price. I take the 50%. They're just looking for bang for the buck, right? So I see that as kind of the situation with a lot of the THC consumers. But those of us who are into herbs know that there's not, that's not where all your enjoyment isn't just smoking distillate or something. It's all the flavors that modulate the effects. And a lot of my favorite smoking herbs might be 19% or 20% THC, but they give me a high that I enjoy more and that lasts longer and a taste that I appreciate more. So it's not just about the blunt force trauma, there's a much bigger picture at play, and all the heads really know that. Um, but for the people that are going in to the dispensaries and they don't know what they can trust, I really want to get the bud tenders online with a reward program for promoting it. And they're going to show people, hey, you can get any of these products that have this certification mark. This is called Third Eye Blind Testing Services, and we've registered a certification mark called Third Eye Blind Tested. So it might just be a half-inch little square on the back of the package. Got a mosquito in here driving me nuts. But then people can see, and the dispensaries can segment their list. Like you can search indoor, outdoor, hydro, greenhouse, all the different search filters on the catalog. You want them to add third eye blind tested. And then people can go and say, look, I just want to see the blind tested stuff because the rest of the numbers, they're just paying extra for high numbers, or they're just sending it to the labs that give them inflated numbers. Whereas we're going to work with labs that have strong quality control, but the main thing is we're certifying there's no collusion between the producers and the labs because they go through one of our agents and they use standardized packaging. So when the lab's running the test, it may have a code on it, but it doesn't necessarily show the name of the producer. So they can't play favorites. They don't, when the guy that's actually running the test doesn't actually know who's he's testing at any given time. So he can't, and if they're uniformly too high, they get out of the program because they don't meet the standardization tests. So they get audited for that. So we have a really interesting certification program. When I had a winery, we were certified organic, so we got to see a lot how that worked, the certification process. And they don't come in and tell us how to make wine. They come in and go, how do you do it? What are you using? Is everything you're using compatible with our standards? Okay, then we certify you. But they don't come in and say, you have to do like this, you have to do like this. So the certification is the part of it. But if you're doing fair trade certified or certified organic, the clients pay a lot for that. So it costs you more to be certified organic than not because you end up having to pay for the certification, you have to pay for the audits, you know, it's a lot of fees involved. Whereas we've made this certification body free for clients to use. So they pay the regular price they pay for their lab tests. And the labs that are participating to get bulk business from us, we get the bulk discount because we say, hey, if you're on board with our certification process and you want to be a lab that's certified to do the double blind testing here, then your COAs can carry this certification mark. The clients can put it on their packages, and the consumers know that there was no collusion between the producers, processors, or with the labs. So, if you make gummies, you have to have every batch tested. If you make fertilizer, you have to. So we wanted to apply to more than just cannabis, but other natural health products too. It doesn't matter if it's salmon oil, soft gels, if whatever your product is, you say it's black and white. If your product's not blind tested, it's I might be high. You say it's black or white. Your product is either blind tested or it's not. So that's why I call them my black and white projects. Your bud is either seedless or it's not. Your product's either blind tested or it's not. It's really black and white. So, we will, with third eye, with the blind tested, because it's free to use for processors and producers, they really don't have a good reason not to use it. They can't say, oh, we don't need another expense. That's a valid reason. You don't want to be fair trade certified because you don't want to pay the fees. I understand it's expensive. We're not charging you any fees. So the companies that don't do the blind testing start to seem a little sus because they're saying, rather than proving integrity, we would just still be happy to have that 36% on our package, you know, rather than an honest 26%. So I'd say the bud tenders have to be the ones to they're in the trenches, they're underappreciated. They work hard dealing with the public. Dealing with the public's challenging, if you've ever done it, the so I think rewarding the bud tenders, we want to have a cash reward program, which have to be really careful for legal reasons. I've been delving into it, and state by state it's different. And in Canada, there's one set of regs for it. In California, there's another. In Kentucky, there's another. So it really varies. So in some of the states, if the cash prize is over $400, you have to do paperwork for the IRS, and so does the recipient. But the idea is for each region, for the bud tenders that are, qualified to be in the draw that month, they have to work at a dispensary that segmented the list to include blind tested as a search filter so that it's obvious that they carry blind tested product. And B, they got to tag us in a post that month. And then the next month, everybody that qualified from the month before, the next month, we're going to take a percentage of our gross sales and dedicate that in each zone to cash rewards to bud tenders. So if we have 50 grand in the kitty in Canada from the percentage of gross sales to labs, that we could have 50 bud tenders win $1,000. So maybe like the second Monday of every month, we have a draw, 7 o'clock Monday night or something like that. But we have to work out the details before we can officially announce how that's going to work because it's, some of the states you have to put the money into a into escrow basically before the event. So there's the compliance throughout the states is a huge pain in the ass. Like it's pretty straightforward in Canada, but in the US it's complicated because there's like 20 different states we're going to do it in probably, and they all have different regs. So it's now I'm trying to get my head around this still. So that is another rabbit hole, believe me, is competitions and giveaways and sweepstakes and lotteries and all the regs that apply to all those. But I really do like the idea of dedicating a portion of the sales into cash rewards to bud tenders. And I think we'll do the same thing with the Verosense program. Once the products start hitting the shelves to promote Verosense, we'll do the same thing. That if they segment the catalog and they post us in, the bud tenders post us in a thing from their dispensary that carries Verosense products, then they'll also get entered into a draw for a portion of the sales. So it should be fun. Anyway, I think that's going to be a neat way to blow it out rather than spending it all on expensive ads and, big booths at shows and stuff. And we'll probably do a little of that too. But really, I want to dedicate a big chunk of the marketing budget's going to go just directly into giving cash to bud tenders. I'm sure that's going to get them all like, oh, it's the second Monday of the month. Let's watch we'll do it on a YouTube channel or something so that every month people can log in and watch the draws in the different regions. Or maybe we'll have them different days so they can watch them, in the various places. So every night could be a different, it's Minnesota tonight and it's New York tomorrow and Michigan on Thursday or, you know, you have this, so people, all the bud tenders in that state, they'll be like, oh, fuck, let's watch and see if we win. I think
Mm,
it'll be fun. I like to see some fun back in it too.
that's super awesome. They are very underappreciated. I
Yeah,
agree.
they're in the trenches and they're the ones that have to face all this. Well, which is the strongest one, and they got to deal with the people, and most of the bud tenders they realize there's more to cannabis quality than THC. So it helps them break it to people. With the blind tested is, hey, the numbers take them with a grain of salt, but if they come with a blind tested thing on it, they're probably pretty good because there's no collusion between the producer and the lab there. So it gives them something to lean on to say this is the mark of integrity with producers. If they're using this program, it's because they're not trying to floss you with full fake numbers, right? And the same, if you want to be sure that there's no seeds in the bud, you have to look for this circle V because
Mhm.
otherwise it's hit or miss. Everybody else's bud might have some seeds in it, but if it's got the circle V, guaranteed you won't have a seed in your joint. So that's to me, if I was buying bud, I would look for these things. I'm trying to make it easier for people to buy better weed. So I think both of these certification programs really will help people separate the weed from the chaff, as it were. So I don't
I
think
find a
people are
little
going to
bit of
smoke.
irony in Breeder Steve. Breeder Steve, it's almost sounds like you get like there's a secret vendetta against the seed itself. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
seedless,
Not
certified
to be
seedless.
present anymore. You know what I mean? That's kind of funny that,
Yeah, like our Instagram thing says always seedless. So for a guy that sells seeds, it's odd to have an Instagram that says always seedless.
that's
You
awesome. That's
But yeah,
super
there's a
awesome.
place for seeds, and that's when you're growing
Now
and
you
making
enjoy.
selections, and if you're breeding, the seeds are everything. But if you're growing weed for finished flower, if the seeds are good and stable, you might be say, hey, I can grow from seed. But most producers, how many commercial producers or even home growers do you know that grow from seed every crop? Some of them that do autos and stuff might, but commercial producers, it's pretty rare. Most of them are growing
Yeah.
mothers and cuttings, or they're buying cuttings from a nursery because they just don't want to screw around with the possibility of males and hermaphrodites that they might get starting from seeds because every plant's an
So
unknown. Mhm.
is there another benefit to a sterile plant, like say a shorter harvest time, shorter flowering time
Shorter
because it's
rooting
not
time.
looking for pollen?
There's a shorter rooting time, and also and this is anecdotal, I haven't quantified it yet, but I do think that the infertile plants do seem a little bit frostier. So it wouldn't surprise me if they had a couple points on the potency scale over the fertile sisters because they're not putting any energy into hairs or micro seeds. A calyx is inside the bract, but you need a microscope to see a calyx. So what the teardrop thing we see is a bract, it's not a calyx. Calyx is inside there at the base of the hairs, which are stigmas. So we've been incorrectly calling them calyxes and pistils our whole lives, but they're bracts and stigmas. And the calyx is a microscopic, ovule at the base of those stigmas. So you don't see the calyx, but once pollen travels down that stigma, it fertilizes the calyx and becomes a seed, you know? So that's where it starts. But once the plant doesn't have the ability to reproduce sexually like that, it seems that they get a little extra resonance over their sisters that have the hairs. So it is interesting, but I haven't done any COAs side by side of them with the fertile and infertiles, but we will do that on the rounds coming up and check them because it's just something I've noticed over time that are these just frostier? I think they are, Visually they seem to be. So I want to see if it changes the COAs at all from even the starting plant to the infertile version of it. So I mean, I gave all the breeders fair warning to join, and I really hope they don't feel bad if they see improved versions of their cuts showing up on that catalog this year, later this year, or early next year, more likely. But I gave them all a chance. I invited all the breeders to participate. If they didn't hear about it, they might have been under a rock. But either way, the ones that passed on it, there's no hard feelings. But anything that's popular is going to be on there, and it's not even me making them. It's all the breeders that did sign up to do it that are signed as collaborators. They're going to be doing it. I'll give them spreadsheets to work from the same page so that they don't duplicate it. I don't need six breeders all making an infertile GG4, But I'm happy if one of them does because I'd want to see an infertile GG4, It's not a question of me even having to do it. It's just it's going to be on that catalog and if the people that read it originally didn't want to do it, that's on them. At the end of the day, I will always give stuff new names because I think you always have to differentiate. And the only thing that ever bothered me has never been people using my genetics. I love to see them use it, even if they're just making reproductions. But even if they're making straight up reproductions, their seeds are different than the generation I named and sold. I would like to see them use an original name on their seeds. And if they want to put in brackets, like this is my version of Sweet Tooth 3, my F2 or whatever, go for it. But if you just call it Sweet Tooth 3, it's not because you didn't use the parents I used to make Sweet Tooth 3. So I could sell Sweet Tooth 3. Nobody else can. If you're calling it that, you're just trying to ride on the popularity of the work that I did. If you put it in brackets and you say, finger licking good number 3, brackets, my Sweet Tooth F3, F2, I could care less, go for it. As long as you use, I hate getting complaints for seeds I haven't sold in 20 years, and people are like, oh, I grew out some blockheads and got some fucking herbs. I was like, well, they weren't my fucking blockheads because I haven't sold them in 20 years. Who the fuck did you get them from? So when people make knockoffs and just use the same name, it's just cheesy. They're just going for the low-hanging fruit to make easy money, and they're just coattail riders. They'll make any excuse in the book, but really, it's just low-life behavior. So I don't have any respect for the knockoff crowd, and they're not improving it necessarily. If there was like a visible improvement, then it would be a credit maybe, but still, I'm not taking credit for it. It's your improvement. Give it your own name. So we might have Goo for a fertile version of GG4, but it's different. GG4 is a fertile plant. This isn't, you know. And if you didn't want to put it on there yourself, that's your problem. I gave people a year and a half, 2 years notice to participate in the program. And the first wave of breeders probably I talked to are kind of like, I don't know, it sounds weird. I don't know, I'll catch on. But we'll see. The ones that are on now are super enthusiastic. I've shown them how to do it. And they're putting together a fucking hard hitting catalog we'll just start putting it out to like the top 100 commercial producers in the world and work our way down from there. And we'll let those producers get the whole catalog. If we got 250 infertile plants, we'll tell every one of them. And we have the tissue culture labs to send them from with phytosanitary certificates internationally. So it's not based in the States. But even from the States, there are ways to legally send the plants to Europe as long as, they're in tissue culture and they're under the THC level, right? They're hemp, right? So the plants do get moved around legally. And I'm going to let those LPs say, look, as long as you sign to pay the royalties of anything you choose to use in production, we'll give you the whole fucking catalog to test for free. You don't have to pay any deposit, nothing up front. You can try out anything you want from this catalog. If you think there's 20 things there you want to try, or you want to try all 250, we'll send you a test tube with every one. And you can grow it out. And a year from now, when you've picked your favorite 10 and that's all you're growing, then you're paying the royalties on that. So if they're 5% royalties, that's split between the breeder and Verosense. And I've done licensing deals with larger producers in Europe before. They do like 20 tons a year of EU GMP flower to Germany. So their greenhouse cranks out 20 tons a year. If it's 5% royalty, that's 1 ton for us. And if they sell them for 2 million euros a ton, which is two euros a gram, which is what they sell UGMP for, then fairly standard. I mean, there's always variation, but average price. So that's 2 million a year to us, half for the breeder, half for Verosense. So if we can get 100 producers like that, that's really adding up. So it's an interesting business model. I know those clones are going to go home with workers, even though it's in the contract. They can't share them. And you and I both know that those clones are going to leak out of those facilities. That's a given. You know, at some point, everybody will have these, whether they're on the program or not. Everybody's going to be growing these plant types, right? It's a given, but you can only contract the first wave. After that, eventually they're going to be common. And, most breeders aren't savvy enough to get what they should for the work they've put in. If your genetics end up with a company that does $1 billion in sales and they're using your genetics they bought for $50, you're kind of getting shorted. Whereas if you were a rose breeder or a corn breeder or an orchid breeder, you could get plant breeders' rights and get royalties for 25 years, or depending on the species, they have different amounts of time that they're valid for royalties. But plant breeders, typically, in most industries, they work for royalties. In the black market, we could never depend on royalties. In the legal market, if you don't have a contract, you're. Not going to get them. Like the average public company, if they can get those genetics cheaply off the internet or the street, they will. There's getting to be more of them that make deals with breeders for royalties because they want exclusive rights to this or that, and there's ways to go about that. And we'll even train licensed producers to make their own. If they have proprietary genetics and they say, well, we'd sure like to turn our genetics into infertiles, but we don't want to give them to you to do it because we want to keep them in house. I said, that's fine. We'll teach you how to do it. And because you're doing it yourself, you only pay us the 2.5% royalties because you're the breeder, gets the other half. But we're not selling the genetic together. You're just selling the flower exclusively. So you've got to kick us back that way. So anyway, it's typical rent seeking behavior. It's business. You're having a go at it. I'd like to try and do stuff that's a little different than everybody else is doing sometimes. And it has an ultimate use at the end of the day. Like if we can show people, hey, they're not getting fake numbers on these packs, that's a win for everybody. And if you can show people, hey, you're never going to smoke seeds when you learn to trust this mark, you're going to guarantee you're getting truly seedless weed every time for your hard-earned money. Because if you're paying $50 an eighth for weed and then you get a seed blow up in your bong bowl, that's not pretty. That's not pretty at
Mhm.
all.
So that's you know you say you try new things. As somebody that sit back over a few episodes and listen to your life story, I sit here on the other side with great awe at your evolution from the black market to what you're doing now. That's you've evolved. You know what I
I
mean?
try
You've
to, yeah.
taken it's
Evolve or die,
amazing.
right? That's the
Yeah.
basic thing, you know. Evolve or die. I mean, I see there's a lot of breeders out there right now, that there's a lot of recycling going on, you know, where there's not a lot of people, there's a lot more people putting in work than ever, I would say, but there's a lot more seed companies than ever. And a lot of them are really seed producers more than breeders. Like it's kind of like the difference between, you know, knocking somebody up and raising a kid, you know, they're two different things, you know, they're two different things. So you you can really nurture and develop something for the long term, or you can just be chucking, you know. Either way, they're seeds at the end of the day. So, you know, every breeder starts out as a pollen chucker. I always say that. I mean, there's no shame in throwing it out there and then sorting through it and see what you find. You know, all breeding starts as pollen chucking, I think. You know, that's, you know, pretty fair to say. You know, it's really the selections are what happens after that, you know, and what you develop generationally comes after that. But if all you want to do is just throw pollen on something and make seeds, well, you can get seeds immediately. But does that really count as breeding? I don't know. I think it's the start of breeding, you know, but breeding is, you know, when you've developed something that is recognizable, you know. So you have to finish what you started to me for it to really be impressive breeding wise. So if you have a breeding goal, i.e., infertile females, and you say, boy, I really love this Mullumbimby madness. Wouldn't it be great if it was impervious to seed and we could grow it outside without worrying about all the neighbors' pollen and stuff, you know? Well, hey, we can. We just got to do the work, you know, and you've got to put in a little bit of work, but then you can turn any plant into one that's a better version of itself. So I think it really is about leveling up what's out there to increase its utility to producers, whether they're personal producers or commercial producers. They're not looking to breed. They just don't want seeds in their weed. That doesn't seem like a big ask to me because I think that's the minimum. If you're in the business of selling sensimilla and your sensimilla has seeds, it's not sensimilla, you know? Now you're selling bud with seeds in it, and that's not cool.
At one point it was a long time
I
ago. It didn't
mean,
matter.
it was cool to
And
have any bud for sure. And
so
I love traveling and seeing like rustic herbs in the middle of nowhere that's like, man, I haven't smoked brickweed in so long that it's kind of fun, you know? Like if you go to Laos or something and you're gonna see weed with seeds in it. It's a given, you know, but that weed's still special. You know, even if it's not great, even as the post-harvest has been just dismal. Like you see, you know, for a long time, most of the weed smoked in Thailand was Laotian because it was more Wild West there, and that's where you could grow it and you could pay off the officials to look the other way, but you couldn't get away with growing fields of it in Thailand for a long time. So like they're used, you know, you go back far enough, it was openly grown and throughout Thailand. And in Thai traditional medicine, TTM, which you think of like TCM as traditional Chinese medicine, but TTM, there's 17 cannabis preparations. So, I mean, they've been using it for millennia and but not as smoke. They've been using it in food, in sauce, and in drinks. So their chicken soup traditionally, like, you know, Thai ganja is to Thai cuisine what oregano is to Italian cuisine. You know, like they put handfuls of fucking weed in that shit. You know, you're getting the traditional recipe. It's got a handful of weed in it. You know, and same in Cambodia, that like it was just a herb to them, until the Westerners, demonized it for them and, had their puppet governments, crack down on it and whatnot. But overall, I think it's still beautiful. I appreciate cannabis in many forms. Like, I'm not one of the people that are, and I can appreciate them, but there's people that I don't do any, I only dab live rosin. I don't fucking combust. I don't smoke joints. I don't smoke bowls. I don't smoke hash. Okay, good for you. You're like, there's nothing wrong. I love live rosin too. But is it the only thing I puff? No, no, I can still make an exception to any other format. I mean, I love hash and tobacco joints. I try not to smoke them because I know that tobacco is bad for me. And I had one at a Christmas party. Because if I'm somewhere where people are smoking tobacco, I'll always have hash with me and say, "Can I do a magic trick with one of your cigarettes?" And they'll be like, "Okay." They said, "What do you get?" I said, "I'm going to turn this cigarette into a hash spliff." And then I turn it into a hash spliff. It's a great magic trick, So, but if you're with people that are smoking cigarettes and they're like, "Man, that smells fantastic," because it's a different, it's a different smell, it's a different taste, especially if it's a real jet black hash that you worked a little bit. I mean, you smoke that up, even if you don't smoke tobacco, you're like, my God, that smells good. Like it just smells good. And I get a kick out of it. I used to smoke them like they were going out of style, but I found the tobacco just too hard on your lungs. And cannabis makes tobacco worse because cannabis is a bronchial dilator. So when somebody smokes pure tobacco, it goes into like their primary alveoli, but not the secondary ones, the fine ones. Whereas cannabis opens it up, so it carries the tobacco further into your lungs than it would go by itself. So, but it also, that's why you get such a fucking head rush from it. Like it's an absolutely different buzz. And I never was able to appreciate bud rolled with tobacco. That always really grossed me out. Like I never liked the taste of bud and tobacco, but I have a soft spot for hash and tobacco because that's sort of when I started smoking. That's sort of where it was at, like we had Moroccan and Lebanese and the AFPAC border stuff, the red seal and the gold mascara on it. We smoked hash, we smoked Jamaican oil, and we smoked it with tobacco. So I mean, that's how I started smoking before we started to see buds. We smoked hash and oil with tobacco. So to me, it's a nostalgic thing too. But of course, the hash I make myself in the last 20 years or 25 years is way beyond what we used to smoke when we were teenagers. But I know what Lebanese tastes like. I know what classic Belgian Moroccan tastes like. I can appreciate them. And the same like with a Mazari Sharif, a nice black from northern Afghanistan. I was fortunate that I was still getting fantastic Afghan from a friend in Holland, even long after it was sort of no longer a thing. But there was always some old heads that were still into it and they would get some through. And the same with the Nepalese. I have one friend from Nepal who's an old timer and he absolutely is an absolute hash snob. And he would bring a kilo a year maybe of the absolute top shelf Nepalese back to Europe. And he could get a lot for grams of it and that would pay for his trip back and everything. And he had a funny way of bringing it, which I shouldn't expose, but he used it for a long time, and it worked. But it's really special. I had another friend that he was renowned for going far beyond Milana. He'd hike to Milana and then hike way beyond Milana, and he would go up there and hand rub. When I say hand rub, I mean gently caress. Like if you rub, you're doing it wrong. But if you really caress the plants and make really nice hand cherish, if if you do it right, it's phenomenal. And I love doing it. I absolutely love doing it. But I'm so careful. If I have any skin peeling in my hands, I wouldn't do it. But if my hands are really clean, and people are, "Oh, you're rubbing the skin off," but I'm not because there's a little thin sheen of oil that stays on the hand from the terps and from the resin, that your hand, there's always that barrier between your skin and the hash. So, but the trick is not to rub it so much that you're picking up hairs or bugs or anything. I call it ghosting the plants. So like,
Mm.
there's resin on the fan leaves and sugar leaves. So without really squishing the bud or touching it, I just kind of go down like I'm just the, rubbing the shape of the plant, but hardly touching it. Takes me about 45 minutes to get these hands black, and it takes me another 45 minutes to get it off. And then I get about a 5 gram little toll of this that is stunning. Like just, you're tripping. You smoke a little bit and you're tripping. It's just fresh off the plant. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love hand rub. You have to have a field. You can't just do it from a few plants in your yard. It's not worth doing it. But if I have enough out there of high grade, and I did this in Colombia too, where I had lots of stuff out there that was even all testing over 30% outdoors in real tests, and you go out and hand rub that stuff, and that is heart attack hash. I mean, it's so delicious, and it just has this taste that's so special. And there's, I don't know. I find that if you did it from indoor, it would be just silly because it's so expensive to grow indoors, and you don't want to be handling the plant at all. You're trying to keep them picture perfect, and that's lovely. But if you've got loads of it, it's a luxury to be able to go out and just barely touch those plants, just ghost them, I say, and I find the act of doing it, it really puts me in tune with the plants because I'm going through, they're all selection rounds usually. So I'm going down the rows and I'm really looking at each plant. And while I'm doing it, I'm giving them this light ghosting, which is making the smells come up of it. And you think, okay, well, you find favorite plants, I'll take out I'll have some plastic ribbons with me, have a little roll of pink plastic tape or whatever, and I'll tie it off and tie a little bow on a favorite as I'm going down the rows. So these it's and or I'll have somebody beside me taking notes, because my hands would be too sticky to touch them, but I'll say, okay, look at the tag on this one and write down the number for me. I love this one. So then we'll go find the backup cutting in the library and put that into a bigger pot so we can mother that one out and work with it, have some more plants to work with from it. So I just love ghosting those plants and walking the fields, just it's really special. I like being outside under the blue skies and see the birds circling overhead and hear the cicadas and just being out in nature. Whereas if I got to be in a warehouse and every door beeps and whistles when I walk through it and all I hear are fans going, and it's just like I get a headache in the warehouse. I just don't love spending my time. I don't want to spend my life in the warehouse. So I know it's a job and people they do lots of jobs that they go to work. Not everybody loves their job, but if you have a choice for me of growing in a warehouse or growing in the field, I'll take the field because I just like to be outside more. And I'm lazy in that I'm lazy and cheap. I don't want to have to pay for that facility and for the power it uses and all that. I can sow seed directly in a field and it'll just sprout in the rain. You might have to put out some scarecrows to keep the birds away and stuff. But the cost of sowing 10 acres from seed versus even making mothers and cuttings and transplanting them into the field, that's very labor intensive. One guy can walk 10 acres in a day with the seed drill. You could have those seed drills that are on a wheel even. You just walk the wheel down and like every meter or every 2 meters, it spits out another seed. And you can just walk the rows by yourself and cover 10 acres in a day that way, and just let it rain and then see who wins. I don't need every seed to come up. I don't care if there's a few gaps in the field. I'm making selections. I want the storms to come. I want the wind to howl. I want to see who's still standing. Natural selection. Mother Nature is vicious and she does so much of that selection work for you. Whereas if you're indoors and you got everything tied up and held up by nets and They don't have to hold themselves up. I want to find plant. It's great. There's lots of really tasty herb needs to be tied up. It's been bottled so long it can't stand up by itself. You know what I mean? It's like those chickens that can't fly, they're all breasts. They got tiny little wings and they're all breasts. But, you know, one example was I had some blue lime pie. I loved the smell of that blue lime pie. It was a beautiful weed, but it grew really floppy. So like the stems were very bendy. So I mean, even if you were just growing a knee-high plant, all the branches would be on the dirt if you didn't tie it to something. Whereas if you're going to go and grow, if your idea is to do mechanized agriculture and harvest stuff at such a scale that you can do mechanized agriculture, so you've got 1,000 hectares to harvest, and you're going to take that down with a combine and a chilled trailer and squish it all. You want to make silos of live rosin. If you want to really try and scale up, you need plants that will stand up by themselves. You can't tie them all to a stake. You can't tie them all to wires, or you can't put nets on it all. You need ones that'll stand up. They're erect plants. So there's different considerations when you're looking for, if you're lazy like me and you don't want to have to handle every single plant and tie it all up, that's a pain in the ass. And so if you're growing for your head and you got one plant and you want to train it against a trellis, by all means, you can get away with anything that way. But if you expect to do open fields of plants that stand up by themselves, you have to test them and find the ones that do that. And then your life is much easier. So I love finding erect plants that stand up alone. And I really don't like growing ones that need to be staked up a lot. So I mean, each to their own. If that's your thing, if you love, handling all the plants and making that happen, go for it. But I love plants where I can set it and forget it. I just want to plant it, come back and cut it later. you know, if I'm doing production. And part of that was guerrilla growing when we started. I had plants I would put out in the spring and I wouldn't go back and even look at them until it was the third week September and I would be coming with cutters in the bag, hoping, oh, they fucking hope they're ready. But I never looked at them in between because it was just a hassle and a headache and you could get busted. So you didn't want to make a trail to the plant. There's some people go there, check it every weekend, they got a bloody trail going to the thing. So if you wanted it to be really covert, you're better off to plant it with a nice deep hole with lots all the food it's going to need, and somewhere it rains enough. Like southwestern Ontario is pretty similar to Michigan. Most summers, you grow a field of corn without any irrigation, right? You have a bigger problem with tile drainage. If you don't have tile drainage, your field might be too wet and it drowns in the spring. But there was some summers where it might be dry for 2 weeks, and I would say, fuck, I better get out and water those things. So once in a while, depending on the summer, sometimes I had to go and take a backpack full of water bottles out there, like pop bottles full of water or whatnot, and just go out and give them all the water. And if it hadn't rained for, if it was over a week, it hadn't rained, I'd go out and water them. But there was lots of years where I never had to go out and water them. So it was just plant it, come back and harvest it. And that's, when people tell me, oh, I can't grow my own weed because you have to do stuff every day. It's like, you can if you want to, right? You don't have to do something every day. If you can go put it in fill a deep hole with compost, you can pretty much rock it as long as it's got access to water on the regular. If you're somewhere dry, like in BC, that wouldn't work because it's too hot and dry here in the summer. You could not get away with that. And I actually did in one case where I was clever enough to plant stumps in a swamp. So the stumps were already pretty rotten. So they were moist, and you could scoop out the middle of these tree stumps. And then I would dump my compost in there and guano and stuff. And I would fill this hollowed up tree stump with good growing mix. And then I would plant it. And then I would pick up all the tree stump chunks I took out, all the rotten wood, smooth it around the top. So it just looked like this little sprout coming out of a tree stump. and that tree stump was in a swamp. So it wicked water all summer. So I did have plants in BC outdoors that I didn't look at between planting and harvest. But in BC, most of the time, if you can't water them, they don't have a chance. So swamp planting is the one exception. If you can plant elevated in a swamp and wick water up, you can pull it off. But I mean, I'm in my mid 50s now, and the last thing I'm doing is hauling freaking bales of soil into the bush. I mean, I'm just too old for it. I can't, I don't, my back won't let me. You know, that's not even an option if I wanted to. But fortunately, homegrown's legal here now, which is what I always wanted at the very least. So even though the commercial regulatory environment isn't ideal, and I've steered clear of it because one thing I'm wary of is when something sucks the life out of your hobby. And I saw that when I was winemaker. The first couple of years I had making wine before I opened the store and everything. So like I started making wine commercially before I opened the wine shop. And those years it was great. I was doing the stuff in the vineyard I liked. I was doing the stuff in the cellar I liked. But once it opened up and you're selling alcohol to the public, now you've got inspectors and audits and all this crazy shit. And that really started to suck the life out of it. So what I loved about doing it was just doing it. I like to grow the plants. I like to process the plants. I see them as a parallel universe of flavorful cultivating and curing flavorful intoxicants you know. So I really enjoyed both making wine and making hash. They're both lots of fun and rewarding at the end of the day, especially just as a homegrown pursuit. It's really a hoot to just grow your own and have your own. And I really like everybody to do it because I always think, you may have been stoned before, but if you haven't grown your own, you've never really been high. You know,
Mm,
You've gotten
I like
stoned,
that.
but until you've smoked your own, you don't have the same depth of connection and feeling with that herb. There's really something special about having your own. Maybe it's just, you know, there's always going to be a bias that you're going to enjoy something. But I also think, when you grow your own tomatoes, I do believe those taste better than the ones at the store usually, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
They're fresher, they ripen on the vine. They're not picking them early so that they have a better time in the truck. So there's something to be said for finishing it yourself and having that sort of, it's not even the 1 mile diet, it's like the 10-meter diet. Like I grew the hash here, I made the hash here, I smoked the hash here. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's gone from my backyard to the porch to the bar. And it's just it doesn't have to go anywhere. It doesn't have to get a tax stamp. I really love that I've had the luxury of not having to do business in cannabis in Canada the last, in this millennium, really. I haven't grown anything commercially here since the mid 90s. When I came back from Europe was early 2000s. And all I've ever done was personal since then, in this country. And then in other continents, I may have other opportunities to commercial things happening. But at home, it's just homegrown. I'm just team homegrown when I'm at home.
That's awesome. So I don't know where to start here. I've got so many things that's popped up since you spoke. Uh I guess let's talk a little bit of hash, all right? Um First of all, I think uh as far as the charas thing goes, there is something amazing about that live resin, basically fresh hash. And I've never patted down the plant. I've never ghosted a plant. But I'm a wet trimmer. I like to wet trim. And if it's a new strain to me or just in general, I will take as I'm trimming and just meticulously scrape off my scissors
Yeah,
off into a shot glass so I can have that first representation of what I may have in the future. And I
Yeah,
guess that is that close as close as I
that's
guess it's a
close. I mean,
dirtier version.
it's always dirtier because you're picking up hairs and you're picking up green material, like because you're cutting the leaf and there's plant sap, like inside the
Yeah.
leaf there's sap, right? So you're getting some of that fresh sap. You're getting stuff on the leaf, whether it was the cystolithic hairs, whether it's stigmas. You're always getting a little bit more than just resin on that scissor hash, but it's close. It's very similar, and it's the working of it and the friction that makes it turn black. And the cleaner you do that scissor hash, like sometimes you see scissor hash or glove hash that comes off the trimmer's hands, but it's really just like a mess of hairs. It's like a clump of hairs stuck together almost. So that's, a dirty version of it. It's not quite the same as just getting a black sheen, but it's still kind of, it's still fun and it still gives you a taste of what's to come.
So another thing I heard you speak about, and this is something that I've talked a lot about on the show, and as everybody has, I'm sure, is like, what's the difference between today's cannabis and yesteryear's cannabis? They seem to have a, a staying power or whatever. And I think that lies in something that you've taken away or wanted to take away there. And you've noted a little bit. And I think that is seed production. The old cannabis that when we, back in the day had seeds. Now, is there a possibility when that plant is producing the seed, it's putting out something a little not just a more resin or less resin, but a difference in resin because I've talked to a few hash makers and they've noticed a difference in making a hash from a seeded plant versus the same strain, Sensimelia. And they thought Ross Kaya Paul was Kaya was the person, one of the people I've talked about, and he had just won a cup from seeded hash or seeded bud that he had made turned into hash. And it was something a little bit more special to him. So do you think that there's some, yes, bad,
It
but is
reaches a
there
different
something a
level
little
of
different
maturity
there?
or something. It's
Yeah.
possible. And it's not the first I've heard of that. Um, I heard a rumor that even Jerry Garcia said he wouldn't smoke something that hadn't been seeded because he felt like it was to at a better level of maturity. But lots of people say, no, no, it doesn't help at all. It's really personal preference at the end of the day. I have never quantified any difference in it. I remember another breeder, an old timer, that he said, "Oh, well, do you ever make hash from the seedless stuff?" And I said, "Well, mostly I'm making it from my seeded bud. That's one of the things I loved about being a seed breeder and seed company was I might grow a whole greenhouse of absolute ranky dank herb, and it's a fully
Mm.
seeded greenhouse. Every resin gland in that greenhouse is mine. I'm selling the seeds. I'm not selling the resin." So if you get to grow 40 pounds of weed and make it all into personal hash, you're not concerned about making the most you can hash. You want to just make the best you can hash. So that's what I love about being a seed producer in those crops is every resin gland I grow is going in my pipe, you know? I find that that's one of the very tangible perks of being a seed producer is every resin gland there is a byproduct of the seed crop. So to me, the resin glands were the joy. And even in Switzerland, I had a Swiss partner, but he didn't smoke. So one of our deals when we started, he smoked when I met him, but then he'd given it up for health reasons. He had some issues. And I said, okay, well, I get to keep every resin gland we grow. All the hash is mine. He said, yeah, go ahead. So all the hash from all our productions, and we had a big size warehouse, pretty good sized field, and then 4 greenhouses. And whether there were sense crops being trimmed or seeded crops being just broken up for seeds. I mean, making hash is half of breaking up pot, right? If you've got 40 pounds of seeded weed, well, you got to break it up. So you're going to have to get your screens out and smash it up, right? So to me, that's an absolute pleasure to be able to wade in the hash. I was running 1,000 liter tanks of ice hash in 2000, in 2001. And most people were doing 5 gallon buckets if they were doing it at all. But I had just more material to play with than the average person. So, and it was only for my head. It wasn't our business, it was just for my head. So I could look, I'm going to do a 15-second wash on this. I could dump in 10 kilos of frosty blue satellite and just give it a 10-second wash. It's only for me. It doesn't matter. I don't have to answer to anybody. Oh, did you get it? How many times did you spin it? No, it doesn't matter. I'm just skimming it for myself. So it was, to me, that's really one of the major perks of being in seeds is absolute gratuitous hash. Because otherwise, you're just getting the seeds out and throwing the hash away. Like, no, you might as well take the hash. It's right there for the taking, right? But in Switzerland, hash was illegal. Plants were not illegal. Flowers are not illegal. Seeds are not illegal. Hash is illegal because they say, it's the use of the plant that could be illegal. It's not the plant itself. It's how you use it. So that you could go into a shop and buy a kilo of flour because you like the way it makes your sweater smell when you keep it in your closet. That's perfectly legal, legitimate reason to have it. So it's just their way of going like this to the neighbors, like, oh, we're not Amsterdam. There's no hash bars. Hash is illegal here. But we're not going to start making herbs illegal because Swiss botanicals is big business. And we don't want to, once we start restricting one plant, then we got to start looking at all the plants. And we don't want to even go there. So plants are legal. Uses of plants may or may not be legal. So that was kind of an interesting approach that they took to it. And wasn't ideal, but it was as good as it got back then. Like there was no better option. There was no better option than that. That was really as good as it got at the time. So didn't need a license to have a breeding operation. Didn't need a license to sow a field. Didn't need to show that it was low THC. They had an advisory that hemp should be zero point 0.3 THC or less, but it wasn't a law. It was an advisory thing. Hemp should be zero point 0.3 THC or less. But there's no restriction on planting any sort of cannabis because you could say, well, look, I've been developing one that smells like grape juice, and it's the only one we know of that smells like grape juice. So I got to keep working it because this is our distinctive signature aroma, and we grow this for its aroma. Okay, they didn't care. They just didn't care. So it was a non-issue. You could go into a mainstream big name grocery store in the springtime where they had all the Dusty Millers and tomatoes and red peppers out front. They had Compolti hemp cuttings. They had great white shark cuttings. They had all different types of weed with the plant tags with a photo on it. And on the back, it would say plant in full sun, ready mid-October, gives good drainage, heavy feeder. Like just like you were buying sunflowers. Like it was really just normal. Like, and I really thought back then, I thought, oh, hopefully in 5 or 10 years, North America's like this. And I'm like, oh, they'll probably screw it up and make you get a license and blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's what they did. So it's way more complicated than it needs to be. There doesn't You don't need to regulate the cannabis industry any more than you need to regulate the echinacea industry. They both are endocannabinoid ticklers, and it. It's just a plant, and when you see all this garbage, you know, fake, the HHC or all the hemp gas station hemp vapes and stuff like that, THCA loopholes and all this, and it's all this garbage shit that gets poured in there. And people are like, yeah, they got to regulate that, but they don't. All they have to do is let good cannabis flourish, and it will displace the shit. The only reason people go and buy that shit is because they don't have real shit on the shelf. If the real shit was, if you could go and buy your favorite trusted brand, then it could be anywhere. It will displace the bad stuff. You know, the bad stuff only exists because of the prohibition on the good stuff. There's the whole regulate me harder daddy thing. It just doesn't get me. I'm just like, no, no, no. They've proven themselves incapable of sensible regulation. Prohibition is the ultimate in regulation. It's you go to one end of the continuum of regulation, and prohibition is at that one end. The other end of the continuum is no prohibition. So regulations everything in between. The regulations lead like prohibition is the big daddy of regulation. And that's them regulating cannabis as they prohibit it. How does that work? It doesn't work. It doesn't serve any rational purpose. It just makes it a problem where it wasn't a problem. All they have to do is go back to the day before they made it illegal, and that's where they got to go back to. They don't need to study how we're going to regulate it and what we need to do to make it safe for children and blah, blah, blah. You know what? Just go back to the day before you fucked up and just, that's it. That's it. Just go back to the day before. It was in all kinds of medicines. It was, nobody thought anything of it. It wasn't a big deal. So it's just painful that these busybodies think it's not, that herb has to be tightly regulated and controlled. It's like, no, no, no. If anything needs to be tightly regulated and controlled, it's these bastards that think they have a right to tell us what to put in our gardens. If you think you got any say in what goes in my garden, just get the fuck out of here. You're just a loser. It's none of their business. Like, none of their business. They overstepped their role. It just made me question the validity of government in entirety. Like I totally give up on the scene. I really have such low expectations because if cannabis prohibition wasn't basically universal for 100 years, there was really nowhere. I mean, they always find exceptions. But North Korea, yeah, okay, whatever. But overall, cannabis been prohibited for the last century in most of the world, 99% of it. That never got rid of it, thankfully. You know, if it was up to the bootlickers, it'd be extinct by now. If everybody fucking followed the orders and obeyed, it would be extinct. The only reason it's not extinct is people said, fuck you. I'm not letting you fucking burn this beautiful species out of existence. They made it more popular than ever. So if anything, the prohibitionists just put the cookies on the top shelf and everybody wanted to climb up to the top shelf and get them. And they got more and more clever about how they're going to get to the cookies. You got to risk it to get the biscuit. So, so if they made it worth people's while to grow, they made it worth people's while to breed it because, pot would never have been thousands of dollars a pound if it wasn't illegal. It'd be the same price as mullen. You know, what's mullen like $6 an ounce, $10 an ounce? It yields the same. Like I've grown mullen, I've smoked mullen. It's
Super
good for
healthy
your
for you.
lungs, like for asthma and stuff. Grows a long bud. Literally, if you're growing a field of mullen, you get about the same yield as growing a field of cannabis, you
Mm.
know? So what do you care? It would if they hadn't demonized it, it wouldn't have become so popular. So they made it, by trying to crack down on it, they just made it more interesting and more valuable. Because if they'd never prohibited it, it'd still be worth $10 an ounce. Nobody'd fucking care. Nobody'd write songs about it. Nobody'd be rapping about their fat ass J's.
Mm.
Their proper doinks or whatever the fuck they're smoking today. I just crack up. But it's the cannabis culture has not suffered, you know, cannabis hasn't suffered. some people might say it has that there's a bottleneck in genetics and stuff like that. But on the other hand, there's never been greater access for most people than there is now. You know, you've got more choice of what to plant than you ever had, and even though there's a lot of overlap, it's pretty good because most of it's pretty fucking nice, like I think it's easy to be down on the cannabis genetics bottleneck. And yes, it is a shame to think of genetics that have been lost to the sands of time. And it certainly happened, but on the other hand, it's also evolved a lot too. So there's lots of great things coming out, lots of great breeders, and I think it was really uncommon to be a breeder 30 years ago or something, or to be known as one, because lots of people, I wouldn't say lots, but there was, a good share of growers were breeding their own just to conserve it, or they wouldn't have it because you couldn't reliably go buy more clones next year or order the same seeds again. If you found something you liked, you tried to conserve it so you had it in your collection. So by necessity, like old time farmers, they would save their seeds. They didn't rely on seed companies because they're like, I'm a farmer and my family eats this food. And if I don't keep my own seeds, I could be in big trouble. So it was out of necessity that old school farmers who kept seeds. Nowadays, most farmers aren't breeders, they're just producers. And that's fine. And they've got reliable access to genetics, whether it's corn or cannabis or tomatoes or rice or wheat or whatever. Not every farmer's saving wheat, to plant again. There are some that do heirloom wheat and they save the seeds, but most of them are just like, I'm in the cultivation business, not the breeding business. And they just want to buy reliable seeds, so I don't know if it's any right or wrong. It's just sort of the evolution of how that market works, how that industry functions. What do you think?
I think you should add carpenter to your list on your resume. Carpenter or millwright, because you continue to build doors for us to open. Are you build and open for us in the cannabis industry? I think that's super respectable. Uh, that's what I think. I sit here, I do. I sit here, I'm watching as I sit here and listen to your stories. You do. You've opened, you continue to build and open a lot of doors for us.
I
And
appreciate your appreciation.
and then to go back to the gas station pens, and another dream you talked about the last time we spoke was the soil to oil. It's an unforgettable phrase for me. Has that came around? And I want to give you another props here, if you will. Is you seem to be a very respectable guy in the aspect that you reach back. You know what I mean? You keep pushing forward, but you keep tending. It sounds like you reach back and want to help out the other breeders. When you spoke of the soil to oil thing, it wasn't necessarily about necessarily a quick processing, manufacturing process. Your words were you wanted to bring the finest, oil you could to the average Joe. You know what I mean? Make it affordable for the average guy to have some amazing, top notch cannabis in a pen. And that's respectable. I think
No,
that's,
that would be
every,
a dream come true, It's easier, it's definitely one of those things, it's easier said to be done. And I know when I set out to do that, it was through mechanized agriculture, was to shift from a horticultural paradigm to a mechanized agricultural one. And to do that, you have to develop, not only genetics that are acclimatized to the site you want to do that, which has to be a very large space of very flat land that you can mechanize and somewhere that gets enough rainfall and all that so that you don't require, let's say, a lot of growing infrastructure. You may require a lot of harvesting infrastructure, but you think if you've got good seeds and you've got a tractor with a seed drill, just like a guy that plants corn, they don't have, 100 farmhands out there transplanting corn cuttings into the field. They take a seed drill and they drive back and forth that field and they lay down swaths of seed. And before you know it, they have a cornfield after it rains and they sprout up. And that's just so efficient. So if you can work out how to harvest and preserve that, it is about time to processing. So the idea was to really minimize the time to processing so that you could go soil to oil in under an hour. That was the mantra. So I was designing a project to do that at scale, but there was certain issues as the regs, as I told you earlier, they were moving the goalposts on me. So it went from there not being any quotas to being, I need a quota for every plant, and every plant has to have a unique identifier number. When you couldn't go and put a unique tag on every plant in the cornfield, you know what I mean? Because there's high density. I don't even want enough room to walk between the rows. I want to take it down like a grain crop. Like if you were going to combine a grain crop, you imagine if they told you, well, you got to tag every fucking plant out there. Cannabis, you can look at it as a grain crop. If it's seeded and you're doing high density planting, the great thing about high density planting, when you see hemp that's they've sown 90 seeds a square meter, they don't all come up. They don't expect them to. They don't care. They just want an absolute canopy of colas with no branches. And so when you see those high density plantings, they do a couple of things. The cannabis outgrows everything around it. So when you've got a clean bare field and you've sown it high density with cannabis seed, any weeds get shaded out. The soil doesn't bake in the sun because the soil's in the shade. So it conserves a lot of moisture. And because you don't have the branches, you can harvest it mechanically with a combine. And you may have specialized combines, but I'll tell you a little thing about combining cannabis. And this comes from the hemp world, and this is how I know this, but if you were getting seed certified for hemp, you had to have, I forget what the cutoff was, but it was extremely low tolerance for males. So you could have monoecious hemp, wasn't a problem. But if you had dioecious hemp, you had a problem. And you couldn't have more than like 0.25% males or something. Like it was crazy the cutoff for it. And that's why a lot of hemp was monoecious. And the reason for that is the males die a few weeks before the females, right? They've spent their load and the males fall over. So you've got all these female stalks that are perpendicular to the cutter. But if you've got a male stalk laying down there, it gets wrapped up in the cutter. So you can't, it fucks up your combine. So they didn't want males in the fields because they die a few weeks earlier. And instead of cutting perpendicularly the way the equipment's designed, they're encountering plants that are, parallel to the cutter, and then they just get wrapped up in it, and then they got to stop and clean the combine, and it's sloppy. So that's why they don't want males in that scenario. But if you think of how a field of grain is taken down, you could do that with the cannabis crops if you could do them at scale. And my dream was to drive that combine one day and just take down, fields of haze in the tropics where you could say, okay, we can take down 1,000 hectares a day with this team of combines, you know, and you could have another team of seed drills that are out there planting 1,000 hectares a day. So that every day of the year you could be taking down 1,000 hectares. It's just a harvest daily program. And then as long as your processing could keep up with that and you had the chilled silos for your massive resin press, you probably have a roller press. And I did experiment with some rollers that were mounted vertically too, so that really helped the resin run down rather than having a horizontal press. You press them with a vertical drop, but you could squish out, just have a constant wave of rosin getting processed. And
Cold press is that would that be a cold press or the heated? Are they heated?
Have it heated, but just to have it at like 40 degrees isn't a big deal if you're in the tropics because that steel's probably 40 degrees anyway, Celsius. So, it's probably warm enough at the room temperature, but you have to freeze it, get the sift out first, and then squish what you want. But if you're gonna freeze the fresh plant and take the fresh sift off of it, then you only have to dry that before pressing. You don't have to worry about drying all the biomass first. So I think it makes sense to shear off the frozen glands before you dry it. And then you don't even have to dry the weed. You can either put it into a blasting column because you can use fresh plant for that. It doesn't have to be dry. It could be fresh frozen. I mean, if your end goal is just a molecule farmer and you want barrels of oil, you can blast it out for absolute recovery. Because when you just take the hash off, you're getting most of it, but you're not getting everything. So there's always a bunch trapped in the material. So I think you take off the solventless sift, fresh frozen, you dry that in a quick freeze drying process. And it's not wet hash. It's wet in that it's fresh, but it's not wet in coming from water because it is not necessarily going into water to do it, right? So you can do it frozen, fresh frozen, but dry. You dig? So before you squish it, it can't be all water in the hash. You want to lose some of that moisture first, right? You don't want to lose all the moisture, but you want to lose some of that first. Um, there's lots of people that spend a lot more time on pressing rosin than I do, but I'm always looking at it like, what can we do to make more of this? So I would look at like a sludge dewatering press, which is what cities use to press sewage into dry, to get all the moisture out of it. They put it through a sludge dewatering press. These things they're rollers, but they're the size of a house, they're huge. So you can only imagine like the processing capacity if you're squishing them. But you look at a sludge dewatering press, that's one big ass roller press. And if you look at how they make apple juice, they use a belt press. A belt press, very similar and it again works on rollers, but it has belts that travel through the rollers, and you can adjust the rollers for different pressures and stuff. But they're more industrial presses, rather than doing it on plates that are on a tabletop. You can't, that works to a point, but it's not going to make the leap to mechanized agriculture. That point you got to start looking at other agricultural tools, or other agricultural processing tools, and go, okay, here's what we need. So there's lots of process engineers you can talk to. So I've hired engineers to review like basic designs I've made up and have them fine tune it. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a customer for it, for the product, like you say, hey, we could make, a ton a week of live rosin, but we can only sell it to countries where it's legal to import. That narrows it down. And we can only sell it there if it's EU GMP. So now you're like, okay, well, we got to get the cultivation can get certified GACP in a field if you're doing a large checklist of things according to their plan. And then the EU GMP is more on the processing side of things, unless it's flower for finished flower, it can be grown EU GMP as well. But typically, the flower is grown GACP and the processing is done EU GMP. And at the time, I don't know if this has changed, but there wasn't, room for EU GMP hash rosin because it wasn't included in the specs of what they approved. So where the hell are you going to send it? You know, if you can't offload it anywhere, there's not much point in producing it. So we get held back more by regulations than helped by them, that's for sure. I can't hear you.
Who's the easiest to work with right now?
Which country?
Yeah.
Far and away Thailand. Far and away Thailand. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can, well, if you're Thai, they had an app. I'm forgetting the name of it. I want to say Pluk Thai. I forget what it's called. Drive me nuts. But it was basically was like an app that said grow ganja or something. Put
Mm.
ganja or something. And it was, you'd stand in your garden and you would drop a pin and then you just make your declaration. I have 15,000 plants here. This is my garden. I've declared it. You're good to go. If you were growing a whole bunch of plants without doing that, you were not good to go. Unless if you could have, I think, 10 plants. Like if you were maybe a foreigner living there and your household, you could maybe have 10 plants. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think that was about it. But if you were Thai, you could say, oh, I want to grow more than 10 plants, but I just have to download the app and declare it. And this is a country of like roughly 80,000 people or something, or 78 million people or 80 million people. And I think they had, like in the first few months, I think they had like 2 million people download the app and declare their ganja. You know,
That's
it was a
wild.
huge amount of people, right? And it's not, um, there's a big disparity in Thailand between the wealthy and the poor. And obviously, like most places, there's a lot more poor. And but even in neighboring countries like Laos, maybe even harder life, So there's it's possible to live very inexpensively there because it has to be, or the people wouldn't be alive because there's a lot of very poor people. And if there's a new way to make money that they can do at their land, they have small farms there. There's a lot of small farms. Thailand wasn't somewhere I never even thought about doing mechanized agriculture there because there just isn't big fields. They're all little tiny fields, and they're mostly rice paddies, at least in the plains. And there's nowhere you could drive a combine. Like everything's 1 acre or something. They don't even talk about acres. There's rye, but they're all small little fields, and they're mostly, pretty much subsistence farmers. A lot of them they commercially grow rice because rice was heavily subsidized, and this became a huge scandal too. But they call the rice white gold. And the funny thing is, there's so many types of rice, and I love having a wide selection of rice in my pantry, but they all grow jasmine rice. There is Thai sticky rice, and there is the Thai red rice, the cargo rice, and they sometimes mix a little bit of that with their jasmine rice to give it some color, makes it kind of pink in that. But jasmine rice is the standard, and it's like the vast majority of what's there. But people grow the rice, they feed their family with the rice, and they sell off any surplus. They know how much they need for the year for them and their family, and then the surplus might sell to the government at fixed rates that were favorable. And that became a bit of a scandal that the government couldn't pay for. It's a long story. I don't know it as well as others, so I won't tell it. But it is there's a green rush. So like anywhere. Once they're allowed to grow weed, people are like, oh, we're finally allowed to grow weed again. We can make real money with this. And then, well, that was the price when it was illegal. Now that it's legal and everybody can grow it, it's not worth what it was when it was illegal. So do you want to grow it when it's still the price of rice? So you see so many people that really went all in on growing. And I've seen this in other countries too. And it's very sad sometimes. Like, and Zimbabwe was a perfect example of this. They had just legalized hemp, basically, and they called it medical cannabis, but had to be under zero point 0.3 THC or something. So really, they were just allowing CBD crops. But, and I talked to the one guy who was like the first guy in on the hemp there, and he went to Colorado and he bought CBD hemp seeds and he brought them back to Zimbabwe. And for a couple of years, I don't know, 5 years later, there's something like 10,000 farmers have sunk their life savings into putting up, trying to grow this stuff, realize it doesn't grow outside here because it rots. I mean, Colorado's a very dry climate. In tropical climates, they have a dry season and they have a rainy season, and the rainy season can be really wet. And even the dry season, they can have some wet spells during that, or high humidity times, even where it might not rain as much as the rainy season, but because it's so hot, if you get a little bit of rain, it's very humid. The Zimbabwe native cannabis, totally acclimatized, high THCV, lots going for it, but that's illegal. You can only grow this stuff from the States. That doesn't work. And now you've got 10,000 farmers across the country sunk their life savings into buying plastic and putting up these hoop houses and trying to keep the rain off and grow it. And they're still just growing moldy fucking hemp. And they can't sell it because nobody wants to buy moldy hemp. So the only person in the whole industry that was making money was the one lady that set up the nursery, and she was selling all the cuttings to these farmers. And she was the only nursery in the country, and she was selling the cuttings. She was selling the cuttings from the same seeds that guy brought from Colorado. They never did 1 year of acclimatization, not one generation of acclimatization to help this stuff adapt. All they did was just take cuttings over and over again of those first seeds that didn't work. And the definition of insanity, right? Is repeating the same thing and expecting a new result. But for 5 years, they just lost money and lost money and lost money, except the lady selling the clones. She was the only one making money. But I talked to them and said, if you have a breeding program, this might have worked. But B, your problem isn't that alone. You have THC phobia. You have native cannabis here that flourishes and it has value in itself, you know, and you should be celebrating it as a national treasure. You should be rejoicing that you have native cannabis that grows really well here. It's distinctive from everybody else's cannabis, yet you're still putting people in jail for growing the native type. It's a colonial mentality where you think I have to bring in the first world seed to grow first world weed. No, no, the first world wants interesting weed. And why not celebrate what grows naturally there already? It's just painful to see. And it's just this horrible mindset where they really think that it's better because it's foreign or it's bad because it has some THC. Well, for fuck's sake, it's not even that high in THC, but it does maybe have a good lift of THCV, which is more in demand. And if you're isolating it and extracting THCV, you're probably get a good market for it. You could be famous for exporting barrels of THCV oil, but instead you're growing moldy hemp and wondering why the Swiss don't want it. It doesn't pass any microbial test. It's all garbage. It's garbage across the board. So they really absolutely fuck these people by giving them false hope and saying, yeah, you can have this, you can be part of the big cannabis industry, but you can only grow this shit and it won't work. And so they really doomed them, you know. The regulators doomed the farmers once more. So I have, limited sympathy for playing along with bad regs. I think at this day and age, we can pick and choose where we grow a little more than we used to. And I mean, even, 25 years ago, I made the choice to grow across an ocean to plant somewhere else where it was a better condition. And I wasn't going to get in shit just because I was growing plants. So I'll make the move. I'll cross the world to grow pot with better, more favorable regulatory environment, right? No regulatory environment, which is the ideal. So in and currently, I think the best place for that is currently Thailand. Thailand does have more regs for this because processing is illegal. So the plant in its natural form is legal, but if you wanted to make an extract from it, And there's some leeway there because people are, made the case for hash and mechanical separation. So I'm sifting it, it's still the raw plant. I'm squishing it, I'm not using a solvent. So they have kind of made the leap from hash to rosin being just mechanical separation of the raw plant. But the minute you start using a solvent, now you need a license for a processing license. And at the beginning, and I don't know now, it may have changed, but it used to be the only processing licenses were in hospitals and universities or military facilities. So at the beginning, like when we had the hemp license in Thailand, the government straight up issued a sliding scale to purchase. And they said, "Oh, well, if you've got a hemp license, we'll buy your crop based on the CBD level." And it worked out. I forget exactly, but it was something like 100 baht per percent or 10 baht per percent. It was a sliding scale that rewarded you for higher CBD. You had to meet like a base level. It had to be like 8% minimum CBD, but then they gave you a little bit more the higher you tested. And the government said, we'll buy everything you can produce. And I was looking at it like, I think it worked out to like 1,500 US a kilo for CBD flower. And I said, well, this is how we bankrupt the Thai government. If they're committed to buying all you can grow, and they were the only person you could sell it to, or the only entity you could sell it to, right? So they're like, we'll buy all the CBD flower, but we process it, we refine it, we sell it. But you have to sell it. If you want to grow it with your license, you have to sell it to us, and we pay you on this scale. So when we saw that, we're like, geez, we wanted to just get facilities up and going because we figured THC was coming down the line. So we said, get the place up and tested. But B, once they, announced the prices where the government was going to buy it off, it was like, what? Guaranteed sale, 1,500 a kilo for
Right.
CBD flower? It's like, man, we could bankrupt the Thai government with this. But of course, shortly after that, I said they don't realize that the market doesn't have fixed prices. So when they offer to buy it for fixed prices, they're they're just out of touch with the reality of economics that once there's a bigger supply, the price is going to drop. And so they were looking. I was like, man, you can't get 1,500 bucks for a kilo of isolate by the time we're online. Maybe a kilo of isolate was $400, but they're going to pay you 1,500 for a kilo of flour. Like, where do I sign up, right? But it wasn't based in they have this fanciful idea that the prices are going to stay the same, and this happened in Canada too. They issued flat taxes on it, and with a minimum, it was like 10% of the value of a gram or a dollar, whichever was more. So if you're selling weed for $15, you had to pay $1.50 a gram excise tax, not counting sales tax or anything, but the excise tax would be 10% of the price of a gram or a dollar, whatever's more. But I'm like, what happens when the price of weed is under a dollar? When an ounce is 28 grams, but it's $20 an ounce? You're going to pay another 28 bucks in tax. That's how it is here right now. Outdoor growers are here getting like $12 an ounce for their flower, but they have to pay $28 an ounce to get the excise sticker to package it. So
Mm.
it might end up retail at 60, 70 bucks an ounce. And that's sort of the cheapest ounces in the market. And mind you, these are Canadian dollars, so knock a third off basically, or 40% off even for US. Um, yeah, it's crazy. But I knew this was going to happen. And this is what happened in Switzerland. Once everybody starts growing, the prices come down. When it's illegal, the prices are expensive. When it's legal, the prices drop. So it's almost like people didn't see it coming, but I couldn't see how you wouldn't see that coming. They thought the price of weed is $10 a gram. Therefore, the price of weed will always be $10 a gram. Doesn't work that way. Once you let everybody grow it, price of weed is no longer going to be $10 a gram. You're going to have to figure that one out. So a lot of these people are finding this out the hard way because all their business plans were based on prohibition pricing, which doesn't hold, thankfully. I wish that's why I wanted to do that soil to oil in under an hour so we could bring, jars of live rosin out for the price of fucking cheese whiz or peanut butter. I only get a big ass jar for $5, That would be glorious. I just think it's so beautiful. But a little dab goes a long way. You don't necessarily need a kilo of live rosin to enjoy it. If I'm dabbing just a little match head at a time, lasts me a long time. I don't need to have a glob every time. I just like a little, like I like a match head size dab, basically. I'm a lightweight. I'm an old dude. Even I was young, I used to pride myself on, I could smoke with anybody and nobody'd smoke me under the table. And it was like, a mission to be hardcore, hardcore chronic. Nowadays, when my hardcore chronic friends stop by, I feel like a fucking lightweight because I'm like, man, I just had it. If I every 5 minutes they're like, here, have another dab, taste this, and they want me to try all their stuff, and I want to taste it. But on the other hand, I don't need a dab every 5 minutes. I mean, just I have a good dab and I'm fucking lit for 3 hours. I like that. But my tolerance isn't what it once was, that's for sure. But I still enjoy it, but I don't need to be, as high as I can be at any minute of the day. Because I'm trying to get some stuff done. And I mean, I can smoke a grass joint and I can pick up the phone and talk to anybody. But if I have a good sized dab, boy, I might have like half an hour where I'm like, okay, hold my calls. I'm
Mm.
not talking to anybody right now. So you get to, hit spun. I, I dig it if I've got, if I'm just shooting the shit, if I'm talking shit with Eagle, I can be buzzed right out. That's fine. But if I'm gonna, talk owner financing with some guy selling a $2 million facility or something, and maybe I just don't want to come across as totally baked. So you're doing business with the normies, I gotta be somewhat, straight at times. And it is
So
what it
are
is.
you smoking more flower these days?
It's very seasonal for me because in the winter, if I'm at home, I don't burn in the house. If I'm gonna do combustion, I go outside. But in the winter, I don't like to go outside and smoke a joint. So I just dab in the house because it doesn't stink as much. Whereas it doesn't smell like you're burning rope. Whereas if I can vape anything in the house, that's fine. But if I'm burning it, I go outside. But now that it's summertime and I go out spending time in the backyard and I'm watering the plant, I roll a joint almost every time I'm gonna step outside. I roll 2 or 3 joints in my pocket and I go in the backyard for a couple hours. I water the plants. I go for a swim. I sit in the shade in my hammock and answer messages on my phone and smoke a joint. So when the weather's nice, I smoke way more grass. And when the winter's here, I dab more, you know, because it's just less offensive to the non-smokers in the house, you know?
Right on. I can understand that.
Yeah.
Makes good sense.
Yeah.
So, I want to ask you this too, since you've kind of talked about going outside and watering the plants and whatnot. Last time we smoked or spoke, excuse me, I wish we'd smoke. I'd like to smoke with you someday.
You'll have to come for a visit, man.
Um, you were saying that year on the outdoor, you were kind of gonna wing it. You were just gonna use what you had around the house, it being banana
Yeah.
peels or whatever. How did it turn
It
out?
works
Are they
great. Yeah, it works
yeah?
fantastic. I haven't spent anything on supplies for these plants back there in a few years. I might buy some more bone meal this year, but I haven't had to get anything for a while. I've had a compost pile that's I've had going since I've been here. This is 5.5 years. And the pots that I set up, I filled all the pots in my backyard that I grow in. I first filled them up with the stalks from my outdoor plants. And when I moved to where I am now, the year before I was on a farm and I grew really big plants that were a couple pounds each. And they had huge skeletons. And I took down those stalks, I chopped up those stalks, and I used them to fill the pots. And then I filled in the spaces, used a bale of potting soil to fill in the spaces. But I would say 80% of the volume was just chopped up weed stalks. So then I filled it in with the potting soil, and then I topped it up with my compost. And that's what I was doing again today, was digging out the compost pile from the bottom, chock full of worms. And there's so many eggshells in it. They're like a soil conditioner. It's almost like instead of perlite, there's eggshells. There's just heaps of eggshells all crushed up in there. I mean, it looks funny because it looks very homemade and rustic. It's unscreened compost. The banana peels are dissolved. The avocado skins and avocado pits, you can still see like a little shiny black thing like plastic. You'll pay, oh, it's avocado peel that's still there. But we eat a lot of avocados, so there's a lot of avocados and banana peels and eggshells and coffee grinds. But I mean, the worms, there were so many worms when I was digging in there today. And I just dig that stuff out, top dress those pots. I have clover growing in them and mint, poppies. I turn the poppies back into the soil, and they're real living soil pots, all of those pots. And they're 80% of the volume is hemp of what they're based on, basically. And that breaks down over time too. And so the soil keeps settling out. So I might add another layer. Like today, I'll post a picture I took today. I chopped down all these poppies before they were done. Usually I let them finish because I save jars of poppy seeds to make poppy seed bread and loaf and sprinkle poppy seeds in my potato salad. And I like eating poppy seeds, so I've got poppies that I save seeds for food, basically. But this year I still had jars of them from other years. So this year I didn't let them finish because when people gave me the plants, the seeds weren't finished yet, but the flowers had mostly run their course. I just said, well, I'm not going to wait for them. So I chopped them down and I literally just took all the chopped poppies and just chopped it up around the base of all these plants, kind of as top dressing or mulch. And then I took all the compost and put that on top of the poppies. So the plants and the worms are getting fed poppies. So I mean, nobody's soil will taste like mine because I keep doing different things to it. So as you kind of build your own terroir that way, for better or worse. But to me, it's like it's not just about the science of growing, which counts, but you can kind of have some esoteric fun with it too. Whether you get your hair cut or you shave your beard off, put your beard in there. I'll put my beard in the soil. Hair is good for the soil. It's
Nitrogen,
not, it
right?
doesn't hurt
Yeah.
it. The goodness might be hard to quantify, but it certainly doesn't hurt it, right? So
Right.
anything that goes in has, some effect, however moderate and minor it may be. But it's about putting your mark on it. So I get a kick out of that. I used to know this crazy hippie grower in Vancouver that he'd moved up from Oregon, I think. And sometimes I couldn't decide if it was because he was esoteric or because he was broke, but he would pee into a reservoir and so it wasn't straight pee. It would be like pee diluted in water. He's like, well, there's a lot of nitrogen in urine. At times I think it's because he couldn't afford newts. I couldn't be sure if it was because he couldn't afford newts or he really just wanted to grow his weed with his own pee. You know?
That's funny.
Either way, his weed was great, but no joke. He was the only dude I knew that was like peeing in his reservoir. Cracked up.
Did you have a little reserve smoking the weed after you heard that? Just a one like breath. Maybe, yeah, it's all right.
Oh, his weed was great. His weed was great, but he was definitely a full-on freak brother, that's for sure.
Funny. It's funny. So how we doing on time? I don't want to be too rude and
That's fine. I mean,
overstay our welcome
I don't
there.
want to bore your listeners any more than we have to.
Oh, I
Um,
don't think that will ever happen. Really, I mean, we your stories are very entertaining and fascinating.
I'm glad
it's like,
somebody thinks so.
oh, we do very much so.
I'll tell you what, let me just freshen up with a refill and a quick dab. I'm here with you.
All right. They're hearting in chat, by the way. What are you getting ready to dab on?
And I did leave a wee little piece from a breeder named um, this was I looked at- give it like 5, 7 seconds, warm up that cold start and get that fresh. The first hit, it's all terp, not a lot of cannabinoids. You're just breathing in the flavor and breathing it out. And then the second time I cook it, then I start cooking off the cannabinoids and blow a big cloud. But that first hit's just that tasty terp hit. It's so nice.
Nice. What
Trust
was it?
me, it was a dog haze.
Oh, nice,
Hem
nice.
dog crossed with old timers haze. That's from Scallywag seeds. Last year I grew half a dozen cuts from Scallywag that he sent out for me to try. And most of them were chem crosses. They were all really nice. He had some Surrey chem, some Magnum Opus chem dog haze, called dog haze. I can't remember. There was a few other ones too. There was a Trinity, straight Trinity. It's pretty distinctive. Anyways, all quality stuff.
I enjoy some Kim myself.
Mm. Mm.
So another thing I think is a little kind of fun is we still share the lava lamp. The last time we spoke, the
Oh
lava
yeah,
lamp was
I was
gone.
appreciating yours there too. I think mine needs a new bulb because even if I plug it in now, it doesn't get hot enough to move the oil. Like it starts to it rises a bit, but it doesn't shoot the thing up. So I think the bulb's just so old that it doesn't get hot enough. It still comes on the light, but it's just a bit fainter. So I
You
changed
know
the
what
bulb out
happened?
on that.
The last time I changed mine, I accidentally grabbed an LED replacement and did the same thing.
Uh,
The
Not
older,
hot enough.
yeah, yeah. So we've talked about current stuff. I mean, I don't think there could be any more room on your plate. Do you have any like things in the fire? Anything else that you're kind of like wanting to do that you haven't, you're not working on yet?
Well, one thing that I've been starting to work at is to do some branding deals and to find some partners in the various locations. And some have showed up, and we have done some back and forth with some contracts, but nothing totally firm is a done deal. As for branded Spice of Life producers, or if somebody, want to open a Spice of Life dispensary or Spice of Life farm gate, what would that look like? What would that take? What are the conditions? You'd have to always have some original Spice of Life in stock, like grapefruit, sweet skunk, sweet tea, shishkaberry, blockhead. We'll call kind of core Spice of Life. Could also have other stuff that I appreciate and help you curate the menu and to grow it and cure it to standards that I'm happy with. I'm okay if you want to do like a straight water project, water and salt, or if you wanted to do it living soil, or my preference would be aquaponic. I would, if I was setting up a facility to grow, I would be setting up an aquaponic facility because I just like the texture of the smoke better generally. And it just grows so nicely. And it's beautiful to have all the aquatic stuff on display. So you could have, if you had a lounge part to the dispensary, or even if you didn't, you could still have the aquariums built into the walls. So, people could see the fish and the plants in the aquariums, but then separately you could also have the grow rooms behind glass. I used to have in my hydroponics warehouse where hydroponics my I had an aquaponics business in BC back in the late 90s, and I had the grow room behind glass, and people really liked that. And I had like a digital CO2 monitor and that in the room, but the room was all sealed up. So obviously you could open the door and go in if you needed to. But I didn't have growers visiting all day. I didn't want them bringing their spider mites into my room or anything. So it's like I just glassed it all in so you could see the demo garden without actually setting foot in it. So I'd always dreamed of having a dispensary or lounge where, say, on one wall, maybe we have 10 closets that are glassed in, and they all have the 10 closets each have four plants. They're the same cultivar. So you might have four grapefruits, they're all 2 weeks apart. So every 2 weeks you put in a new clone, you take out the finished one. So you just have them so it always smells like grapefruit and you can see it at the different stages. And the next cabinet could be sweet skunk, and the next cabinet could be sweet tooth, and the next cabinet could be shishkaberry. So this way you could go up, you could see the plants growing, but we can't have the people touching them and stuff. So they're behind glass. But imagine you have just a little 4-inch vent fan and a button, like a doorbell. So you just press the button, it blows the smell right in your face. So it's like sticking your head in the closet without sticking your head in the closet. So I wanted to have kind of like the scratch and sniff, grow catalog or the living library, where you could go into the dispensary, you could see each of the plants behind glass, you could smell them, but you can't touch them or spit on them or breathe on them or anything. But you can totally smell them fresh up every time you come over. And then you can say, yeah, I smelled that sweet tooth on the back. I want that fucking, you had sweet tooth 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and I want that sweet tooth number 2 there. That was smelled just like what I want. So that people can see the living plant and smell the living plant. I think that's you know, in Canada, they can't look in the jars, and even they can't even have see-through jars. They're going to change that apparently, but right now you can't even have like a see-through thing on your Mylar bag. It's just got to be everything's closed. So people can't go into a dispensary in Canada and see what they want to buy. They just can look at the label. That's it. So they can take it or leave it. Here's what it is. It's on the label. You don't get to open it and see it and smell it until you leave the shop. So that's kind of lame, obviously. But, I can see why maybe they don't want people handling it, but I would be fine with, people taking their chopsticks and pulling out the bud from, I don't give a shit. We grabbed a handful of bud and put it in a bag and nobody died. Doesn't matter. But people are like, hey, you can't touch it with your hands. It's like food, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's not like food. You're going to burn it. Anyway, not everybody needs boy in the bubble grade. Like, yeah, maybe if you're immunocompromised and you gotta have your irradiated weed so that there's no chance of any microorganism that's alive on it. But most of us can smoke weed out of Ras Bubba's shack and it's not gonna change anything, you know? It's perfectly fine, you know. If you could just buy at farm gate, you know, if you if you could buy untested farm gate because you know that that grower's cool, you know him, you go see him, you've been buying weed there for ages. He smokes his own weed. It's not like going into a gas station and getting some, triad fucking shit that's had fungicide sprayed on it the week before, you know. They spraying the mites on the drying line, you know. It's a, you know, it's buyer beware. You know, even the big companies in Canada had recalls where they were hiding the fungicides in their ceiling panels. They would bring them down and spray prohibited fungicides. And the regulators never caught them. Sick patients and journalists outed them, you know? And the regulators gave them a slap on the wrist as an afterthought, you know? But there's, it's a false sense of security, the regulations. They really don't protect anybody. They're just a false sense of security. And if there's open access to good weed, there won't be any market for shit. You know, people will buy trusted brands or they'll buy from their neighborhood farmer. And I don't care if you don't care about Rasta Bob's weed getting tested and you're happy smoking it, that's fine. You know, that's up to you. That's between you and Rasta Bob, you know. But you shouldn't have to say I can only smoke corporate weed, you know, that's been irradiated or I don't feel safe. Well, you're a fucking loser. You know, I don't care. That's fine though. You want to be a loser, be a loser. You know, that's not a crime. That's just bad taste, you know, but that's fine. I would rather just grow my own because I enjoy growing the plant as much as I like consuming it, if not more. I think even if I stop smoking it, I still grow it just because I like the look of it and I like the smell of it. And, you know, even as they're growing, the smell changes. You know, the first week of flower is different than the fourth week and the eighth week. You know, they
Mm.
always the smell evolves, and I just get so much pleasure out of watching plants develop that are plants I like. And even if they're not ones I particularly in love with, I still enjoy checking them out. You know, it's just kind of fun. There's so much variation in cannabis. I mean, it's quite a diverse species, no matter the talk of the genetics bottleneck and everything's getting homogenized. There's some validity to that, but on the other hand, there really is still a huge range of cannabis. You know, there really is. There's such a diverse range.
I like
You
to.
know what the
I'd like to think that some of that it comes from the outdoor breeding. I think that is something that we need to is very important because when you're outdoor, when the plants are bred outdoor, I think it's passing along a better toolbox and you're getting more of an expression across the board. I think a lot of the indoor breeding, you kind of talked about the plants that are weak and won't hold themselves up. I think that kind of comes from indoor
very
selection,
much.
indoor
Yeah,
selection,
yeah.
that weakening of the plant that you kind of referenced a little bit
Yeah,
there.
there's a lot to be said for doing some outdoor work and breeding, and the preponderance here, the I'm at a loss for words sometimes, but the common factor of the indoor weed is it's been bred to work indoors. So when you go try and take that back outside, you often get your ass handed to you because that weed, like you said, can't stand up by itself. It's not used to the elements. It's used to being shielded from the elements, being coddled, you know, and that's okay. You know, not everybody has to breed for hardiness, you know, but at some point, it's pretty nice to have hardy plants. So it was one thing I always thought was important breeding. And I used to, from the mid 90s on, I used to do my selections. I do 3 generations a year of most of my things. And I could do one selection round outside in the summer. And then I did 2 selection rounds indoor in the winter. So, indoors, you're not going for hardiness as much as flavor and effect, let's say. Whereas outdoor, that round was about hardiness, So I'd still want to pick the ones that smelled best and tasted best and everything. But if they couldn't stand up, they weren't making the cut. They had to survive the elements. So moving those selections from indoor to outdoor really made those plants viable for both, because they had experienced both in their breeding. So a lot of people would always tell me that. They say, so much of the indoor stuff I grow that's nice. If I take it outside, it just falls apart. And a lot of the outdoor stuff I grow, when I bring it inside, it's just not that great. It's great outdoors because it finishes, but it doesn't float my boat inside. But they're like, yours is, strong in both places. And that's by design, it's not an accident. It's just, I think using you know, the pressures of the outdoor environment, wherever that may be, you know, the neat thing that Colombia had going for it was they have, I think, 11 Köppen climate classification zones, which can be like, Amazonian rainforest, mountaintop glaciers, cloud forest, deserts on the ocean. They had just all these different climates and conditions. So if you're in one of the lowland hot climates, the lower the altitude, the hotter it is, and at that plate at the hot climates, you would have certain fungal pressures like septoria or pseudocercospora, and these are hot climate fungal problems. You don't get any powder mildew in the hot places. It's just too hot for it. But if you go to the highlands where it's cool and wet, then you got powder mildew problems. You might not have the septoria problem anymore, but powder mildew is an issue. So if you're breeding for fungal resistance and or you want to identify markers for fungal resistance, you might say, okay, well, I'll go to the highlands where it's cold and wet. And there's a PM1 gene. It's the same gene in tomatoes even, but let's say you're trying to identify a gene for purple and green is often an easy example I use. So you say you grew out 100 plants from your cross. You crossed a purple plant and a green plant, and you grew them out, and you had 50 plants that were mostly purple and 50 plants that were mostly green. So you could just put them into two groupings and have all 50 samples and to send off to a sequencing lab. Usually you'd clean off a petiole with alcohol or something and you just send them a little leaf petiole. I've had other samplers that just wanted a leaf punch where you just punch a hole in the leaf and stick that in a little vial.
Hmm.
So they might have to dry it first, but you just rot in the vial if it's fresh. But um, you group them. You do population segmentation. So you'd say, check group A and group B. These 50 samples have one trait, and these 50 samples have a different trait, but otherwise they're sisters. So see what the difference is. And they would sequence them. They would put the results into a comparative analysis program and might run it overnight while they go home and go to sleep. And they come in the morning and say, turn on the computer and they go, okay, all of the samples in group A had this marker, but at the same spot, all the ones in group B had this marker. So what does it mean? So the lab guys can tease that apart, but they don't necessarily know. So you say, okay, group A, purple, group B, green. Now you've identified the marker for purple and green, right? So once you've got that marker, the next time you're going to go through, and it can be for THCV. Let's say you want to raise a THCV. You take your highest testing THCV group and put it against your lowest THCV group that are sisters and say, what's the difference? And they'll say, this group A is higher in this. And so then that's your target, you know? So you're looking at for that plasmid in new populations. And that lets you speed up a lot because when you're starting your next rounds of seeds, once the plants are very small still, let's say they're on the fourth set of leaves or something, you can start sending off those samples. And or if you're really lucky, you've maybe developed a marker test that's just a quick test on and off. It's either pink or blue kind of thing, right? So you can check a leaf punch of these things in the dissolved liquid that'll have a reagent it reacts in the presence of that cluster, of that plasmid. So the marker for that gene will make that expression apparent. You'll see a color indicator for its presence or absence. So you can do that for male or female, right? Nobody, as far as I know, nobody developed a test for hermaphrodites like that. But you can do the sex testing like that. So, but there should be one that's, I guess, purple or green or pink or blue for the male or female, but maybe yellow if it's a herm, it should have something else pop up. But I don't think anybody's got there yet. But I don't think it's going to matter. I think once the infertile plants are the new normal, and they're going to be. I've been a cannabis futurist long enough to know that some things are going to take. And I know that once people get their hands on them, they're not going back. If they're breeders, of course, if they're breeders, they're going to say this is not what I need. I want fertile plants. I got to use males and females. Because if you only use females, and there was a study that shown this recently, but it sort of, intuitively always thought it was a good idea to use males and females for proper breeding. But there was a study that showed recently that I think 40% of the genome is missing when you're only feminizing. That you're literally shrinking the chromosomes, because there's a whole lot of material that's a whole lot of genetic information that's coming from the male side that's not getting in there. And so they are losing something in the process. Now, for better or worse, you can't say that's always a bad thing, but overall, for genetics conservation, it's really important to use male and female to keep the genomes intact. I think it's important. Um, but as far as breeding as a tool for, conserving genetics is one thing, but isolating certain traits and fixing certain traits, they may be a dead end, but that might be the desired end. So for me, the infertiles are like that. They may not be the, they might be an end goal of once I've bred this cultivar I want, now I want to level it up to infertile so it doesn't get fucked up. I don't want I don't want when people are smoking this, I don't want them to get a seed in it, whether it was from itself or somebody else or your neighbors. You just want weed that smokes better. That's really the bottom line. And if it smokes better without hairs and without seeds, let the hairs and seeds be gone. You know, at the end of the day, the joint is the point. It's how does it smoke? So I have no shame in it. I know some people are like, oh my God, you're gonna ruin cannabis. It's like, no man, I'm fucking fine tuning it. There's
Mm.
absolutely nothing to be afraid of. It doesn't detract from breeding. It just levels up things to a point that make them safer for everybody to grow. And it's that ease of cultivation that makes it appealing to people. If they go, oh, I tried growing, but all my shit was seedy, that turns them off, right? 'Cause they're like, I had some stuff herm. How many people have had a fucking problem with accidental pollination? Just about every grower out there, you know?
Especially outdoors. Yeah, I think that, I mean, if you were an outdoor cultivator, a sterile
Even
female
closet
would
guys,
be,
they're like, I went away for a weekend. I came back and there was a banana opened on this one, you know? And then they got some seed in their butt. And every time they roll a joint, they're trying to pick them out. And it doesn't happen every crop, but it's happened to every grower, you know?
well,
Let alone, let alone
you,
outside.
well, not on a commercial level, but I mean, a lot of people grow out here and are new growers. So if they're planting just seeds or whatever, and they don't know how to spot that male, they could actually ruin the neighborhoods.
That's
You know
right.
what I
That's
mean?
right.
Everybody's getting seeded. So if you
No,
were the
this is
smart
your
guy on the block
insurance.
that threw out,
Yeah.
sterile females, you'd be all set. Yeah.
Dude, I had a customer years ago. He was a dear friend. I haven't seen him in a very long time, but he was from California, older guy. He'd definitely been around the block and he knew his shit. He had a big property in Palm Springs. This was in the 90s, and he'd bought a bunch of seed from me. And he loved the smoke when he was in Vancouver. And he says, "Yeah, I'm going to grow this out in Palm Springs. I own a mountain outside Palm Springs, and I run drip lines, like miles of drip lines that are like full on hoses coming off. You know, a 2 inch municipal run down this mountain. And then I've got garden hoses coming off to each plant, you know?" So he was growing those 18 footers and stuff. He was growing humongous sweet skunks and sweet tooths down there. And he brought me some. He brought me some of his Palm Springs outdoor, but it had seeds in it. And he said his wife nearly left him because he'd gone to a huge amount of trouble and expense and risk, grew out like 2,000 plants on their mountain, and he'd hired workers and done the whole thing, did a fucking whole crop, missed a male. The whole mountain had seeds in it. So he couldn't, his wife was like, "Okay, well, you do it. As long as you're going to make $1 million this summer, I'm okay with it." He couldn't sell the fucking stuff. It all had seeds in it. So he was jammed up with all this weed. He brought me a quarter of it to smoke, but he's like, it's seeded with itself. I missed one male, but he was huge. He was like a 15-foot male, and everything on that mountain got pollinated. And his wife was like, "You're 60 years old. You've been doing this your whole life, and you can't tell the males from the females." Just gave him so much shit. He's like, "I got to go back to BC before she kills me. He came up and stayed with me. He's like, "My wife's gonna kill me just because I missed a male." Like, fuck, that's for this summer. So I just thought it's just such a common mistake. And in the developing world, it's not even a mistake. It's just normal, you know? They don't think anything of it. They would be shocked to get weed without seeds because they've never seen it. They just expect that they're going to be picking seeds out of their weed forever. And they probably will be because this isn't necessarily going to trickle down to, you know, every village in the world overnight. But I think that once they get a cutting that doesn't make seeds, as long as it works where they live, they will cherish that cutting. You know, they'll be like, "Dude, this is the one we could grow that never has seeds in it." But they have to be able to keep the cutting going. So if they don't have a light, they might have a problem doing that. They don't need much of a light, just enough to keep it in veg. You can give it a little bit of light for 10 minutes at midnight and they could probably keep it in veg. But if they can't, might have an issue. But facilities and whether it's your closet or whether it's commercial greenhouse, you can't afford not to keep your own mothers, because you can't rely on nurseries, most nurseries at least. And I know of plenty of nurseries in Canada and in the States that people have had problems with because they've gotten viroids from the nursery, or they get bugs from the nursery, or the clones are just weak this batch and they look like shit. And growers and nurseries, they butt heads so often. Like if they do great work and all the power to competent nursery man is a great thing. I'd love to see competent nurseries. And I was in the clone business at one point too, and had a beautiful thing set up and to put out 50,000 clones every 2 weeks. And they were mint, and people were super happy with it because other nurseries, they didn't always have dark green, healthy clones. You go pick them up and they're yellowing and looking kind of weak and runty, and they're like, "Fuck, I'm paying for this," like, but they need them, so they got to take them, because they've been planning on it, and they don't have their own mothers. But I know some producers in Canada, and they refuse to deal with nurseries just because of the inconsistency, right? So they'll be like, "I can't risk depending on the nursery to be consistent. I need consistency. I have to do it myself. If you want it done right, do it yourself." And if you want to gamble, go with a nursery, and if it's a nursery that does a great job, that's fantastic. And I'm really happy for everybody that has one they love to work with. But this is another thing I'm starting to license out is authenticated spice of life cuts. So I've already started the process of certifying certain nurseries. They have to show me that they make good quality cuts to begin with, that they got healthy mothers and good quality cuts, and people are happy with the quality of their work. And then I get them my classic cuts, all of which are already all over the States and Canada. So it's not like I have to send them to the States or something. I just have to identify the right ones because I know who's got real ones, and it's pretty easy for me to verify. So I can say, okay, yeah, I trust that you have the real grapefruit, and I know where you got it from. I've seen your pictures of it. I've seen, you sent me a drawing, whatever. I know you've got the real deal. So I'll say, this guy's got authentic grapefruit cuts. People ask me all day, every day. If I log into social media, there is 10 messages waiting. Can you send me a Shishkaberry cut or can you send me a sweet skunk cut? So now I just want to say, I want to authorize a network of propagators, whether they're hobbyists or commercial, and then let them print out a certificate with a number. So all of them will be numbered cuts and the producer's number or the propagator's number will come first. So say you're the first guy to do it, you might be propagator 001, and then the plant number is dash then 000420 or whatever, and the next guy that orders one from you gets 00421, but it'll still say 001, so we know it came from Eagle at the beginning. So every plant will have a unique identifier that'll accompany them. So they get like a certificate of authenticity that they're getting a genuine spice of life cut. So that's going to be fun. So definitely want to. I've got people in a lot of the states, and I was surprised at first. Then I understood later, but the most nursery people that applied were from Virginia. And I was like, I didn't even know it was legal in Virginia, but I don't keep up with everything that fast. But they said, I said, why you're like the fifth person in a day from Virginia? Virginia's pretty small. Like, why is it so popular to be a nursery in Virginia? And he's like, well, it's like, I forget, $250 application. He's like, it's not even a license, it's just a permit. You pay like 250 bucks and you get a permit that allows you to be a nursery because homegrown's legal, but there's nobody growing commercially. So they only give permits to people to be nurseries so they can sell cuttings. I said, okay, that's why all these Virginians want to do it. But I think there was somebody in Michigan, but maybe just one person in Michigan so far. But there should be in every state. I definitely want to see, authorized spice of life propagators in every state so that, if you say, I want to get the real grapefruit cut, maybe 200 bucks plus shipping and handling. And if you say, I'm going to charge 20 bucks shipping and handling, that's between you and them. And then we would split the 200 bucks, 100 for you, 100 for me. So there's nothing, there's people selling clones for a lot more than that, but it's still not giving them away. And traditionally, when I always would sell them, I would sell them, $5. People are usually getting a tray of clones or whatever. When I used to do it, I always just sold them for $5. So you get a tray of 50, 250 bucks. You can go back. That was just pretty standard operating procedure for us in the day. And still to this day, I don't think they're really going for any more. But on singles where people are buying it because they want to get a certain authentic clone only, then and like my sweet skunk clone only, that's almost 30 years old. That's my oldest living cut of something I bred. Or the grapefruit's the oldest cut of something I selected, but it wasn't something I bred. So that cut is a clone only, and there's lots of real ones and fake ones out there, that there's lots of confusion. So I was like, if I can help you find the real one, then you know you've got the mother of so much of what's out there today. You know, that was the mother of like anything with a Z, basically, like all the Skittles, right? That was from a grapefruit. So I mean, it's so far into everything. People want to start seeing what the building blocks were. Let me taste the heritage of this, you know? So I think that's pretty fun to go back and try the classics, you know.
Agree. I agree.
Can't hurt.
No, I agree. And 100%, you got to appreciate the building blocks, the ingredients for some of the stuff that has put out today. I think there is a bottleneck, to be honest, with a lot of the genetics, and I think
I
that's
call it
just
Cannabis Americana because
yeah,
it's all blended. Like there's so much in the States that's you can't tell them apart sometimes because it just tastes like the West Coast. It's like everything's rolled into the same stuff after a while. So you do get a certain homogenization. But on the other hand, there are fruity things and there are gassy things and there are totally dead animal smells, you know? Like there are distinct, you know, parts of the spectrum, the cannabis flavor spectrum. It's still
mhm.
pretty broad, but I do see that homogenization, and I think of it as cannabis Americana. I just think this tastes like West Coast America. You know, there's something there. Like it's all got some ice cream cake, and it's all got some mac, and it's all got some gelato or sunset sugar or whatever. It's all just rolled together there, and a lot of precursors to that. You think how much grapefruits and everything, or how much blueberries and everything. So that's why when to me, grapefruit and blueberry sweet tooth. But people would hand me Skittles joints and not tell me, say, here, taste this. Tell me what you think it is. I'm like, is that sweet tooth? They're like, no, it's Skittles. I'm like, oh, it's probably grapefruit and blueberry. you know, but it just reminds me of sweet tooth. It's like it's not exactly the same, but certainly that family. So I get a kick out of it. But I know what you're saying. Like there's a lot of stuff has merged together and melded together into modern cannabis, really, and that's what we think of as modern cannabis. But it's not always a bad thing because let's think of it. It's all based on what's been popular, you know? So if you want to think of like in 100 years, people will look back to all that West Coast flavors as almost being California landrace. It's not really, obviously. It would be like heirloom Californian stuff at that point. Even if it's built on everything, cannabis doesn't have a passport, never did. So I mean, it's always silly to assign a nationality to it, really. Whereas it's evolved by being traveled around the world and acclimatizing, traveling around the world and acclimatizing. And, every breeder today stands on the shoulders of every breeder that ever seeds before them. So it wouldn't exist otherwise. It's a super long chain of human intervention that has brought us to where it is today. It's not all a bad thing. If people from 100 years ago could come and smoke the weed of today, do you think they'd be disappointed or blown away? You know?
I
So
think
you,
they would be. That's
I
a
think
tough call, really.
No, I think most of them would be blown away, man. I think most of them would be blown away. And it's not to dismiss everything that existed 100 years ago, because I guarantee you there was legendary quality 100 years ago too. Because I know very well from 30, 40 years ago there was. I'm pretty sure before that we didn't start it in the 80s. I'm pretty sure there was kind of bud. It's just like with wine, you can go to France and find tons of shitty wine. They might have some of the best wine in the world, but it's not all the best wine in the world. The same when you go to Jamaica or something. There's going to be good weed, there's going to be shit weed, and there's going to be great weed. And it was always that way. It's really attention to detail of the person growing and handling it. If they just chop it down and throw it in a big pile, it's going to be shit weed, you know. If they hang it up and gently clean it up and keep it nice and not stacked, and keep the airflow there so it dries out and it doesn't compost and smell like ammonia. It's really the attention to detail post harvest can make or break it. You can grow fantastic weed in the field and fucking fuck it up in 24 hours. It doesn't matter. You can spend 6 months growing a beautiful bud and 2 days later it can be shit. Just if you leave it in hot, humid conditions, it's gonna start decomposing. So it's what I find in the tropics a lot. It is not that the genetics suck. It's that they don't have the resources to handle it correctly. Like they don't have air conditioning in their house. They sure is not going to get air conditioning for their weed, you know. They can't afford air conditioning. They can't afford the power for the air conditioning. It's not happening. So they're hanging it up somewhere. It's 80% humidity and 38 degrees Celsius. That shit is brown in 2 days. No matter how lime green and delicious it smelled before you cut it, is 2 days from now it's gonna be brown and chocolatey. There's nothing they can do about it unless they can hang it up in air conditioning. So once you go and start growing in the tropics and you have a reefer trailer to start hanging your buds in, you'll see a very different side of tropical grass. If you can do the preservation by keeping it cool. If within minutes of being cut, it's hanging up in air conditioning, you can finish it super sexy. It's really nice to see.
You
That's
think
really
that
what draws me. Go ahead.
I was just, well, again, kind of listening and wondering, is it where at that a point where people should concentrate the most on when it comes to temperature cannabis? Because I see so many indoor growers kind of worried about temperature. You gotta keep it between 75 and 80 degrees best. Then I see the same plants I have indoors, outdoors, and they're thriving at 90 plus degrees in the sun, but yet indoor we're trying to pamper them, and keep them chill. Do we worry too much about like indoor conditions like that when we should just focus on, the proper finish? Are we, I don't know. I think we do coddle the plant too much indoors when it comes to heat and stuff like that.
Well, one observation about heat I'll bring up, and I know we've been dragging this out, but the amazing thing I've found over the years, and sadly, it wasn't all well documented because A, when I left Switzerland, it was in a bit of a hurry and I did not get to take my hard drive with me, but also we weren't keeping tons of records back in the day for obvious reasons because they were a liability. It was just a track record of what you were doing that you didn't want a track record of what you were doing at one point. But what I've seen, and this is really, I've seen it pretty consistently, if you take the same cutting and grow it at different temperatures, at the cooler temperatures, which was what I always aimed for indoors. We were always trying to keep it cool indoors and even cold at night to really bring out the colors. Like we like to say, oh, yeah, get it chilly at night and get the purples coming out. It's bag appeal there, right? And it's sexy for the photos. And so we like to keep stuff really cool. But when I take those same cuts and grew them in a greenhouse that was quite a bit hotter, they would be done like a week earlier. And I was always like, why are they finished so fast here in the greenhouse? And they were the same cuts would be done earlier. And then when I took those same cuts and grew indoor greenhouse and in the field, and in a field where it was very hot, 38, 40 degrees Celsius every day, those 8 week indoor cuts that were 7 weeks in the climate controlled greenhouse were 6 weeks in the hot field. it shaved off a quarter of the ripening time. And the buds were rock hard. Like there was nowhere left to ripen. They had filled in, the hairs were shrunk, the bracts were swollen, the plants were done. 45 days instead of 60. And so I'm not telling everybody make your room as hot as you can. It's the median heat units. So I defined it. I wrote a little thing about it actually called the cannabis median heat units. And I've worked with agricultural research stations in both Colombia and in Spain, and I floored them. In Spain, this one potato breeder from Germany was working there. He's one of the directors of this research institute. And when I explained my cannabis median heat units thing, I said, this applies, I guarantee you this median heat units applies to everything. Because in grapes, to define where a certain grape clone does well, we look at degree ripening days. So that's when you add up the highs from bud break to harvest. So then you have how many degree ripening days do I need? And the accumulated heat units. So you might say, well, I need 1600 heat units when you're adding up the highs every day during the ripening season. You might need 1600 heat units to ripen a Pinot Gris. You might need 2400 heat units to ripen a Merlot, and you might need 2800 heat units to ripen a Cab Sauv. So if you're at a site that doesn't get 28, you shouldn't plant Cab Sauv because it'll always be unripe and taste like green peppers and never gets to its full fruity potential because it doesn't get enough heat units to ripen it. But and the same with corn. They'd look at the degree ripening days they call CHUs, corn heat units. You can look up a map of Michigan and find the corn heat unit belts, and it'll show you the degree ripening days for the corn, where they add up the highs every day. Is essentially there's a little bit more to it than that, but essentially they're adding up the highs every day of that season. With median heat units, what I've learned that totally doesn't totally dismiss what the other units are, but I feel like it's more accurate by having the median heat units because it wasn't the hot days that were making them finish faster. It was that they didn't have cold nights. My lows were 24 Celsius. My highs were 40. You know, it's that median that matters. If I had 40 in the day and colder nights, it's a little different. So if having the warmer nights help it's like they got started faster every morning. They started ripening faster every morning. They weren't trying to shake off the cold of the night still, which maybe slowed the ripening. And of grapes, slowing the ripening can be a really good thing because if you get high sugars before you get phenolic ripeness, you might have, more than enough sugar to hit the alcohol you're aiming for, but you haven't taken the time to develop the aromas and flavor and the phenolic ripeness. So you'd visually see phenolic ripeness by when the stalks of a grape stem, if you picture a cluster of grapes and you get a cluster of grapes and the stems are woody, you bite those, hardly any taste. You get them with the green stems, it's like biting a banana peel, right? Those are short chain aggressive tannins. Once they've got phenolic ripeness and become woody, same with the grape seeds. If the grape seeds are immature and you bite them, super astringent because of the strong short chain tannin. But when the seeds are woody and hard and they crunch, they don't taste like anything, right? So those are the long chain tannins, which are they add a soft, silky mouthfeel to the wine, whereas the short chain tannins are very abrasive and like biting that yellow banana peel, just suck all the moisture out of your mouth. It's like, ah. So there's something to be said for slow ripening in some cases, and especially with the grapes, and that's very well documented. In cannabis, nobody's really documented whether or not that exists as a factor. Does slow ripening increase the flavor in cannabis? Or are we just trying to hit done? You know, because when it's done, it's done. You can tell it's done. The leaves are fading, the buds are rock hard. It can't grow anymore. There's nowhere left to grow. It's all filled in. It's swollen. It's tight. The shit is done. So, is it better if it takes an extra 2 weeks and it's cooler temperatures? I couldn't really say it is because that pot that finished, 25% faster, it was as good as it could be. I mean, I couldn't imagine that pot being any better than it was. It just finished way faster. And I didn't just chalk it up to the hot days, but to the warm nights or the lack of cold nights, even.
This is what I can tell you from my experience um, in drying. Okay, because I've worked with like a few dryers, cannabis dryers, and I've done hang side by side the hang method versus cannabis in the dryers. And the one thing, and some of this is theory, and some of this is I can tell right off the bat. I think the dryer method, the warm method, is more of a like a flash dry, which is preserving more of like what you would know during the live plant. So the terpenes that are coming off the plant when you smoke it, when you smoke the faster dry cabinets in a dryer, you get more of a wider profile. On the inhale, you might go, okay, here's a little bit of grapefruit or whatever. Then on the exhale, you might go, I taste a little bit of something else on that exhale there. There's a little bit of wider profile there to where I think in a more slower method that there is if the plant's still dying off, it's still going through chemical changes basically. So uh it's still changing the taste, the profile, the terpenes as it dies off. It's going through a different process and it is changing a little bit more. So the quicker
That's
dry
definitely
is
changed.
it is more of a live representation versus a slower dry kind of does change and go through a little bit more of a different taste
Yeah.
profile. That's
Well,
what I
that's right. You don't get, fresh herbs never chocolatey, whereas cured herb can be chocolatey. And it's kind of the difference between the primary aroma and the secondary bouquet. So when you bottle wine, you have your primary aromas, but in the bottle over time, it develops that bouquet. And that's more the melding of primary aromas into something new, in the new compounds form. And sometimes they're oxidative in nature, like that chocolatey taste. But is that wrong or just personal preference? If you want the fresh frozen and get that live plant smell, nothing wrong with that. It's cool. But that doesn't negate my enjoyment of stuff that's cured and has developed different characters, which may not be in fashion, but it doesn't matter. It's what obey your taste. It's not about being cool, it's about, enjoying your herb. And part of that is the, especially with older hash or, like a red lab or the red oils, those are all the oxidized shit that they couldn't sell when it was blonde for some reason. But that older stuff that's got more CBN, a lot of people really like that because they have physically demanding day. They get home, have their dinner, whatever. They just want to relax. They want their body to melt. And I find CBN like the closest cannabinoid to opium. Where if you just want to feel like you just got a massage from the inside out and you just want to relax, you don't want to be wired. So cannabis is funny that, it can be an upper, it can be a downer. It can be lots of different things to lots of different people. And if you're going for that fresh frozen thing, you're getting bright, fresh flavors, you're getting a very, full on effect, and it's usually heart racing, high THC, low CBN, and it's very much a stimulant, you know, whereas if you can let some stuff age, I shit you not, I've got hash from 2005 in my collection, you
Uh,
know, and that stuff, if you look under, is blonde still, but if you look under a microscope, there is a fair bit, there's bits of red, and it was actually in a log kind of because it had just hardened it. And when I found it, it had misplaced it for like 11 years or something. And oh, look at this, that was from 2005. And the outside of it had kind of got a red crust, but when you broke it open, it was blonde inside. And it was a few ounces of sift. I love that red shit for nighttime. I don't have it in the morning. If I want to get up and get going, I want something that's more stimulating. But if I just want to tune the fuck out at night and watch a movie and just melt and chill, I'll reach for something CBN rich. And I even developed a nice way about 10 years ago. I worked out a conversion that I haven't seen a better one out there yet,
are
where
you
I
gonna
can
share? At one
not
point, I asked you what your favorite molecule was, and you
I
said
haven't I
CBN.
haven't shared publicly how I did it. And it was an accident. I'll tell you this, I discovered it by accident and it happened twice. The first time it happened, I didn't recognize it, what had happened. The second time I did it, it went bing. I know what I just did there. You know, the first time I just cleaned up the mess, threw it out.
Mhm.
I'm like, I fucked that up. I threw it out. The next time I did it, it was kind of a byproduct reagent of what I was doing. And I was like, wait a sec. I just turned that yellow distillate into red distillate. Why is it red? Oh, it oxidizes to CBN. CBN is red. And I realized, and it was a very quick reaction. Like it happened in minutes, so it was, I've seen people try and do the conversion various ways, using peroxide or using UV lights or all this other stuff. I came up with something a little more mundane, a very
Mm.
simple household material for a reagent. But I haven't put it out there publicly because, at least at the time, it was, haven't checked the markets lately. So I don't know what the price of a kilo of CBN oil is these days. And usually it wasn't even pure when you could find it. But when I first figured it out, it was like alchemy. But instead of turning lead into gold, it was turning THC into CBN. But the CBN at the time was 10 times the price of THC because nobody had it. So if you could get somebody reliable kilo of clean CBN, that was something that it didn't really exist. And it's still not very common today, I don't think. But I think there's more of it than there used to be. But it is something I've sort of held close to my chest because I do think it's a worthwhile commercial thing to have, where you can compete with people. If you have the same stuff, you've got to compete on price. If you don't have the same stuff, you don't. If you got something different. So it's appealing that way. And for medicinal cannabis, what a lot of the medical crowd tell me is they say the number one thing people request cannabis for is pain relief. So everybody's trying to, get their clinical trials set up for various types of pain relief. Okay, the second most popular thing that people request medical cannabis for is to help them sleep. And CBN is your sleepy time one. So it's something I would like to focus on with the medical production is cranking out CBN at scale. And you don't usually find, I've found one genetic that just seems to put out CBN. It's not even that it converts, it's just that it produces it in the plant, which I'd only seen one time in one lot of seeds. and those were a Pakistani seed, I think from the Murray Valley, and they had naturally high CBN, even grown out in the West Coast here. It wasn't like just old weed that we tested. It was fresh grown here, and it was still testing out high CBN. I've never seen that before or since anything else. But THC oil, like THC distillate, is super, super cheap, right? It's just a hot dog water. There's tons of it out there. If I can get that for, let's say $1,000 a kilo, and CBN is $5,000 a kilo, it's a pretty good fucking business model. It takes me 2 hours to convert it, and not very much, not a lot in the way of equipment to do it or reagents. So it's a pretty great situation if you can be cranking that out. If everybody's doing it, it's going to be worth the same price as THC because it'll just crash. It'll be super common. But for now, I've held that one. I've told some people, of course, but as I've tried to get it started at some places, but then the will wasn't always there to see through developing and testing a product because you do the preclinical trials and then the clinical trials, and that's very expensive to set up. So if you want to enter formal medical markets with, a tested pharmaceutical product, you've got to go through these trials, and they take years and they cost a fortune. So if you're going to invest in doing that, you want to do it with something that you have a level of enduring differentiation that it's not as easy to copy. So if people have to figure out how to do it, at least that's going to take them a little while. Mhm. Someday I'll put it out there again, I'm sure, because I have told some people, I know there's probably people out there that'll figure it out, and there's probably good chemists that just never even thought about figuring it out, that would figure it out in a heartbeat because they understand chemistry. I'm not a real chemist. I have a rudimentary understanding of it at best, but I also have lots of practical experience fucking around with oil, and I've seen some things, and I've learned some things and figured them out. But it's as much through trial and error as theoretical knowledge. The theoretical knowledge I don't have. I'm hard pressed to draw molecules and stuff and say, oh, if you add one carbon ring to this, it's like, okay, fucking lost already. But I never was good at drawing the molecules. Like even when I studied winemaking, I got the top marks in the class on the practical where we'd have to test volatile acidity, 5 decimal points, you know, and get the same number as the teacher. I'd get an A+ on the test because I was very accurate in my measuring and reading the meniscus correctly and all that. So I was very tight about my lab testing, but when it came to drawing the molecules and whatnot, I just fucking terrible at it. So on the theoretical chemistry, I would wish I'd studied it more and had a greater understanding of it. And sometimes I say, hey, I figured out how to do this. I gotta ask a chemist what I just did, you know. But I have some idea, but I can't enunciate the details as clearly as someone who understands the chemistry better than I do. I'm just a hack, but a hack, if you hack enough, you can still get there. You know?
I wouldn't by any means call you a hack, that's for sure.
Well, I would. Jeez. But I have fun with it.
So I guess this is a pretty good point to call this one good. Um, I can't thank you enough for coming on and
Well,
sparing as
my
much
pleasure.
as
I
you.
can't thank you for listening to me ramble on for this long. I can't believe how this must be your longest episode ever.
No, actually, he's in chat. Rasta Bob, Rasta Bob, me and Rasta Bob did an 8 hour episode from Jamaica. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
it was a great episode too.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
amazing. No, now I feel like a lightweight. Lousy 3 hours and 40 minutes. Jeez, I'm slacking. I'm slacking, dude.
Well, with that, with in all fairness, though, this is like our third or fourth conversation, and that was our first. So we had a lot to go through. You know what I mean? We're getting bits and pieces from you. If you add up all yours, I mean, technically, we haven't
Oh
heard it all. So
man.
you're winning in that aspect.
Oh,
So
that's great. Anyway, it's not neither here nor there. It's we'll have to go visit Bob in Jamaica though. That would be
he's an
great.
awesome guy.
I've
That's for
got a
sure.
bunch of guys doing some testing for me down there now. So I do want to head down this winter and see how everything's turning out that we sent them, you know. There's about four different locations. I had a friend testing with his friends around Jamaica. So I'm overdue for a trip to
Well, there
Jamaica.
you go, Bob. Hit up Steve. May make a
Yeah,
connection
man,
there.
we'll come for a sesh. We'll come for a sesh.
All right. With that being said, couple things to remind you. That link that I sent you is always good. If you're paying attention to the chat or the show channel and you ever see a Weed Nerd World, that's kind of a only open to past guests, which there you are. And the past guest list is up to 800 and some people now. So you never know what you get when you punch into the Weed Nerd World, who's going to show up. And it's kind of awesome in that aspect. Know that you're always welcome. If you see that, you check out the channel and it's on. You can pop on if you want. You can hang out, watch. But you're always welcome, is what I'm getting to there. The other thing I'd like to get from you is an updated soundbite for this episode. This is episode 844. If you would give me some type of soundbite again, what I'm looking for is, hey, this is the Eagle. I'm on fucking talking shit with the Eagle. Episode 844. Make it your own, please. I would greatly appreciate it, and I am ready for that right now.
I love talking shit with Eagle.
I'll take it, brother. I will take it.
Is that
Thank you for
okay?
your time. And again, at such short notice, I can't, I
My
appreciate you
pleasure, man. It
making
just
time
worked
for me.
out good. I had the free time this evening, so I'm happy to get back in touch with you. It's been quite a while.
Yes,
Easy,
and I
we
won't
can.
make it another 2 years before I check in with you. So
All right.
have a wonderful night, and I'll look forward to speaking with you again.
Likewise, brother. Have a great night, and thanks everybody that's put up with me for almost 4 hours. That's impressive.
Uh, our treat, our treat.
All right. Take care, man. We'll
You
talk to you
too.
soon.
Have a great night. With that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. I greatly appreciate your time as well. I've seen a bunch of new names and a bunch of names from the past, which is pretty awesome. Thank you guys for continuing to tune in after all this time. Don't forget to do something nice for somebody. Random acts of kindness do save lives. With that being said, I am out of here. You guys have a great